Chapter 1180. The four major star fields of the human race were divided into four directions: north, south, east, and west. At the center of the intersection of the four star fields, there was a huge floating continent. The top of the continent was flat, and the bottom was like an awl. It was as if it had been dug out from a piece of land and had existed in the vast starry sky since ancient times. This was a floating island, an island suspended in the boundless starry sky. When Chu-Mu and Zhuo-Yi's small planetary-level starship approached, Chu-Mu immediately felt a vast and ancient pressure everywhere. The floating island was very large. The surrounding void seemed to be suppressed, without the slightest ripple. Looking from afar, the light around the island was dimmer than other places. The closer they got, the stronger the pressure. Chu-Mu looked solemn. He slowly discovered that there were many small, broken continents around the huge, ancient, floating island. They were like a group of meteorites outside a planet. The broken continents were of different sizes, and they circled around the floating island in the center, forming a circle of islands. The planetary-level starship docked on one of the larger continents. The small continent was about 10,000 square meters in size. Chu-Mu could see that there were countless seals on this small continent. In the center, there was a bulge, like an altar, and a person was standing on it. "Eighth messenger, you're back." Zhuo-Yi brought Chu-Mu closer. The person on the altar immediately bowed and greeted Zhuo-Yi. "Open the transmission array. I want to go to the main temple." Zhuo-Yi nodded. His tone was still gentle, but it was not as cordial as when he spoke to Chu-Mu. "Yes." The person stabbed the sword in his hand into the center of the altar. Suddenly, the altar trembled and released rays of light that wrapped Zhuo-Yi and Chu-Mu. The transmission array was activated. Chu-Mu and Zhuo-Yi disappeared from the altar. The next moment, Chu-Mu and Zhuo-Yi appeared in a palace. "Eighth messenger, you're back." In the palace, there was also a swordsman in charge of the transmission array. He bowed respectfully to Zhuo-Yi. Zhuo-Yi nodded to him and quickly left with Chu-Mu. The enormous palace appeared ancient and magnificent. The sword god's main shrine was a shrine left behind from the era of the gods. It was a shrine personally created by the sword god. Even after experiencing the darkest and most dangerous period of the gods' fall, when the center of the immemorial world was shattered, this shrine was still intact. The 100 Races' main divine palace was a divine palace personally created by the gods. It possessed great power and was completely indestructible. Only by becoming a god could one resist it. At this moment, Chu-Mu was standing on the incomparably high roof of this main divine palace that was filled with history and glory. He raised his head and could not see the end. He could only see a boundless starry sky with countless stars shining brightly. It was as if he wasn't standing in the main hall, but under a boundless starry sky. The main hall was like a world, a complete world with stars revolving around it. Chu-Mu gradually lost himself in it. "Deputy Grand Hall Master, Chu-Mu does indeed possess a high-level divine realm sword intent and spatial law power. Moreover, his talent in swordsmanship is something I've never seen before." In the main hall, other than Chu-Mu, there were other people present. Zhuo-Yi was one of them. Zhuo-Yi was standing not far from Chu-Mu and bowing. In front of him, there were 3 figures high up. They were very blurry, as if they were illusory. On the left and right sides, there were 6 figures, making a total of 12 figures. They were also very blurry. The Sword God Hall's Grand Hall Master, 2 Deputy Grand Hall Masters, and 12 elders. Such talent has indeed never appeared after the gods' fall. I wonder what his temperament is like. The Deputy Grand Hall Master on the left said. His voice was steady and heavy, but it was as if it came from endless space, unfathomable. A true expert wasn't just someone with talent and potential. They also needed a corresponding temperament. For example, some people were born with incomparable cultivation talent. They could easily cultivate to a height that ordinary people could only look up to. However, when they encountered a predicament, they would retreat and feel fear. They would lose the courage to press forward and the determination to slash everything with the sword in their hands. For such a person, no matter how outstanding their cultivation was, they had no fate with the word expert. Especially when they fought with the foreign races, they would only be giving the foreign races battle merits. Therefore, a true expert's temperament was especially important. A person's temperament was full of many aspects. Willpower was one of the most important aspects. Entering the main hall was actually a kind of test. The moment Chu Mu stepped into the main hall, the test began. No one would give him any hints. Everything depended on himself. An ordinary person would be completely lost in the boundless starry sky. Chu Mu wasn't an ordinary person. He wouldn't be lost in the boundless starry sky. However, the problem was how long he would take to wake up. There was a standard for this. I remember that the first divine child, Guanlin, took 400 breaths to wake up. Yes, during the gods' era, the best record was 300 breaths. After the gods' fall, the best record was 400 breaths. The lowest record was 900 breaths. If Chu Mu can wake up within 900 breaths, he didn't continue speaking, but everyone understood what he meant. Zhuo Yi stared at Chu Mu's figure. At this moment, Chu Mu's eyes were lifeless. However, in the depths of his pupils, there were countless twinkling stars. He was completely immersed in the boundless starry sky above his head. He was addicted to its beauty and couldn't extricate himself. Zhuo Yi had personally led Chu Mu over. On the starship, he had guided Chu Mu's swordsmanship in the name of sparring. Zhuo Yi had high hopes for Chu Mu. His eyes were a little nervous. Soon, 100 breaths passed. No one moved and no one spoke again. Everyone's eyes seemed to have penetrated countless space-time and landed on Chu Mu's body. 150 breaths, 200 breaths. The best record during the gods' era was 300 breaths. The best time after the gods' fall was 400 breaths. No one had any expectations before 400 breaths. In their opinion, being able to wake up within 400 breaths was already very, very good. In the blink of an eye, another 10 breaths passed. 210 breaths, so he didn't know if it was his illusion, but he seemed to have seen Chu Mu's pupils tremble. The countless stars in the depths of his pupils seemed to be shattering. The entire starry sky seemed to be collapsing. However, it was very, very slow and difficult to detect. Suddenly, an indescribable ancient aura seemed to emanate from Chu Mu's body. Like a storm, it swept out and filled the entire hall. Everyone couldn't help but gasp in surprise. Suddenly, their gazes became sharp, like swords that pierced through the void. Chu Mu's body trembled. The starry sky in his pupils completely shattered and collapsed. His lifeless eyes shone with a bright light. He woke up. The moment he woke up, Chu Mu felt indescribable and irresistible gazes land on his body. It was as if they wanted to see through him. "You're awake." Zhuo Yi's voice was trembling. It was filled with unimaginable shock. 215 breaths. The voice of the deputy chief hallmaster was also trembling. Shocked, everyone was shocked. Their gazes instantly became extremely hot, as if they wanted to burn Chu Mu. 215 breaths. It's really 215 breaths. Ha! Our human race has a chance to rise. Even in the age of the gods, there had never been a swordsman who could wake up in 215 breaths. Chu Mu was the only one. Announce Chu Mu as the 10th son of God of the human race. Announce to the 4 major galaxies. The voice of the chief hall master sounded slowly. There was a trace of excitement and trembling in the depths of his voice. 215 breaths was much better than the previous best record of 300 breaths. Such a result showed that his willpower was incomparably firm. With a firm willpower, his temperament must be extraordinary. This was inevitable. Chu Mu was shocked when he heard this. When he came, he only said that they would gather at the main shrine and receive training together with the other sword of Gojoseon on the Iron Blood 100 battle ranking. He never thought that he would become the 10th son of God. The heavenly sword Hall already had 9 sons of God. He was the 10th, so naturally he was the 10th son of God. The words 10th son of God kept reverberating in his mind. The words of the chief Hallmaster were the opinions of the others. Immediately, the news of Chu-Mu being the 10th son of God was announced to the 4 major galaxies of the human race. The news immediately spread like a storm, causing huge waves. Chu-Mu. Who is Chu-Mu? Chu-Mu. I have never heard of this name. The Son of God is the most outstanding genius of the human race. What ability does Chu-Mu have? This was the first time they had heard the name Chu-Mu. The Son of God has already been chosen. Chu-Mu must be extraordinary to be able to become the Son of God. In the 5-element sword sect of the demon sword star system, besides those who were in seclusion, everyone else had heard the news. Those who knew the name Chu-Mu were even more astonished. Chu-Mu? Could it be him? No, it should be someone with the same name. Son of God, Son of God. Although his talent is not bad, it is still far from. On the huge sword-edged starship, Captain Li Duan, Minister Yunfeng, and the others had also heard the news of the Heavenly Sword's Chief Divine Hall's announcement to the 4 major galaxies. Their first reaction was astonishment. Do you think the Chu-Mu in the announcement is that Chu-Mu? Or is it another Chu-Mu? Li Duan asked with a puzzled look. There were countless people of the human race in the 4 major galaxies, so it was not strange for people with the same name to have the same surname. Because the announcement only mentioned the name and did not mention the origin of the person, it naturally caused a lot of speculation. I think it's most likely him, Minister Yunfeng said. Minister Yunfeng said, not long ago, Chu-Mu left the trial realm and entered the top 100 of the Iron Blood battle list. Then, he was taken away by the 8th divine envoy. Now, there is another piece of news. Li Duan and the others got excited when they heard this. The 10th son of God had once been a member of the Sword Edge Corps. Chapter 1181. At this moment, countless glories gathered on Chu-Mu, but there were very few people who really knew his identity. However, countless people in the 4 major star regions of the human race remembered this name, Chu-Mu. Many newborns were also given similar names by their parents, such as Chun-Mu, Li-Mu, Wang-Mu, and so on. If they were surnamed Chu, they were directly called Chu-Mu. He didn't mean to impersonate or substitute the name. He was just following the trend. It was also a superstitious thought. He hoped that this name would bring good luck to his child. He hoped that in the future he would achieve something in swordsmanship and become a respected swordsman. Chu-Mu, who was in the Sword God's main divine palace on Sword God's floating island, did not know that the 4 major star regions of the human race were changing their names because of him. In fact, every time the name of the divine son was announced, it would always cause such a frenzy. After a period of time, it would quiet down. After becoming the Sword God's main divine palace and the 10th divine son of the human race, Chu-Mu was arranged a residence. It was a small floating island around Sword God's floating island. The area was about hundreds of thousands of square meters, and there was a palace in the center. This was the floating island that belonged to Chu-Mu, and the palace that belonged to Chu-Mu. The palace did not have a name. The plaque on the door was empty. This palace belongs to you. You can name it whatever you want, Zui said. As Chu-Mu's guide, he was responsible for letting Chu-Mu know about the Sword God's main divine palace. Chu-Mu raised his head and looked at the blank plaque on the door. His pupils trembled slightly, and his eyes slowly became deep. It was as if 2 vortexes had appeared and sucked everything in. Zui did not speak again. Instead, he stood to the side and did not emit any aura, for fear of affecting Chu-Mu at this time. Time passed unknowingly. Chu-Mu stood motionless, his eyes unblinking as he stared at the blank signboard. It had already been half an hour. Traces of aura were emitted from his body. It was sharp, like a divine sword that was slowly unsheathed. The aura grew more and more intense. as if a volcano was about to erupt. Countless streams of magma surged. Suddenly, Chu-Mu leaped into the air and unsheathed the five-phase sword. A bright silver luster, like the light that tore through the darkness, was born from nothingness. The melodious sword cry overflowed, like a long song traversing the space. Zhuo Yi's eyes sparkled as he stared at Chu-Mu's sword light. The silver-white sword light seemed to contain traces of gold. The intertwining of gold and silver gave off an indescribable feeling. Where the sword light shone, words gradually appeared on the blank plaque. Xiao Chen's figure gently floated down, and he sheathed his sword. The two words were engraved on the signboard. They were carved deeply into the wood and looked very lifelike, as if they were about to fly out of the signboard. Zhentian. The first glance was plain, and there was nothing special about it. The second glance contained endless sharpness. The strokes, hooks, and horizontal strokes were like a sword that was hidden in the scabbard, but also like a divine sword that was unsheathed. The words were silver-white and contained traces of gold. They were broken one by one. Not only did they contain endless sharpness, but there were also traces of ethereal fluctuations and a trace of desolate, ancient vicissitudes. Sharpness, sharpness, ethereal, destruction, desolation, indestructible. The two simple words contained many kinds of aura. Zhuo Yi's eyes could not hide his surprise. He realized that he had not seen through Chu-Mu before. Zhentian. Zhuo Yi nodded and carefully tasted the two words. The calligraphy of a sword master was generally not bad. Chu-Mu's two words could be said to be a grandmaster. There were also divisions in the palace. There was a main hall, a side hall for receiving guests, a cultivation hall for cultivating sword origin, a sword training hall for practicing sword skills, a bedroom hall for resting, a pill hall for refining pills, a sword casting hall for forging swords, and a teleportation hall for teleportation arrays, etc. In addition, there were spiritual fields and mines for planting spiritual herbs and spiritual plants, as well as ores and metals. After entering the guest hall, Zhuo Yi introduced the structure of the sword god's main divine hall to Chu-Mu. After that, he stood up and left. He was a divine messenger, and a divine messenger had the duties of a divine messenger. A beam of sword light leaped up from the main divine hall and soared into the sky, flying toward a small floating island. In the blink of an eye, the sword light fell and a figure appeared in front of a palace. It was a middle-aged man in a loose green robe. Of course, middle-aged was only his appearance. In terms of actual age, he was more than 1,000 years old. This person's eyebrows were green, slender, and sword-like. His pupils seemed to be glowing with a green luster. His long hair fluttered in the wind. At the end of his long hair, there was a dark green luster. It was a luster that was a mixture of green and gold. This middle-aged man in green robe had his hands behind his back. He walked over as if he was taking a stroll. He stopped outside the door and raised his head to look at the plaque on the door. Zhentian. A fleeting voice came out from the middle-aged man's mouth. It was as if he was carefully savoring the two words. After a while, a faint smile appeared on his face. It seemed that he was looking forward to it. The middle-aged man did not push open the door of the palace. Instead, he flicked his finger and knocked on the door. The sound was melodious and layers of sound waves spread out. Ripples that could be seen with the naked eye condensed strangely and blew in one direction. They avoided the walls and entered Chu-Mu's ears. Other than Chu-Mu, no one else could hear it. This was clearly a manifestation of the control of power that had reached an unparalleled level. Chu-Mu's tightly shut eyes instantly opened. A bright light shot in all directions. Without any pretense, his figure flashed and he appeared behind the palace door. Opening the palace door, the first thing he saw was the middle-aged man with long and thin green eyebrows. "You are?" Chu-Mu asked. "Qing Mei, your guardian." The middle-aged man in green robe smiled faintly and said, "So it's Senior Qing Mei." Chu-Mu immediately saluted with his sword. The eighth divine emissary, Zui had already told him that every divine son would have a path protector. The so-called path protector was someone who would protect the divine son on his path of the sword. In the end, it was someone who would protect the divine son until he became a sword saint. Every protector was at least a 4-star sword saint. Therefore, protectors were also called protector sword saints. Sword saints, who could become guardian sword saints, were very powerful. They were at least at the top of their peers. It was indeed awesome to have the protection of at least a 4-star sword saint. However, one shouldn't get carried away and think that the Tao Protector Sword Saint would protect them all the time. This was because the Tao Protector Sword Saint's duty was to protect, not to be a bodyguard or a nanny. Only when one faced a strong enemy that one could not fight against would a guardian sword saint intervene. For example, if a creation realm cultivator encountered a nirvana realm or an eternal realm cultivator, a guardian sword saint would intervene. However, if a creation realm cultivator encountered a creation realm cultivator and was killed, the guardian sword saint would not take a second look. A guardian sword saint protected the way, and the person being protected must also be qualified to be protected. I will not intervene if the threat is not at the saint level, Sword Saint Greenbrow said indifferently. He did not treat Chu Mu differently because of his respect. Threats below the saint level must be faced by Chu Mu personally. It was also a disguised test to see if he was qualified to become the divine son of the human tribe. The divine son was not just a title. It was not a title, but a responsibility of the human tribe. Without the corresponding ability, how could one bear the responsibility? Chu Mu did not care about Greenbrow's attitude. A sword saint should have the demeanor and pride of a sword saint. Even if he was appointed as the 10th divine son, he was now just a sort of Gojosian in the creation realm. To a true expert, no matter what kind of status one had, it was not something they could rely on. Only strength was everything. Senior Greenbrow, please come in. Chu Mu stepped aside to let Greenbrow in. No need. This time, I am only here to meet you, Greenbrow said. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure faded rapidly. A breeze blew past, and the faded figure dissipated like a puff of smoke, disappearing from the world. Chu Mu was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he closed the door of the palace again. He did not have to worry about where Sword Saint Greenbrow was. Normally, Sword Saint Greenbrow would only appear and follow him when he left the place. He entered the sword training hall, drew his sword, and began to practice his swordsmanship. Chu Mu majored in the lesser 8 forms of the void shattering. Although he had already mastered the essence of this swordsmanship, he could still improve if he continued to practice it. At the same time, it could also help to refine the rules of space and improve his mastery of it. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Inside the sword training hall, there was also a sword testing stone. It was about the height of a person and had the shape of a person. There was only one that stood alone in the sword training hall. It was completely black and was specially used to test the power of swordsmanship. Even the sword of a sword saint could not break it. Moreover, it had the ability to recover automatically. Inside the sword training hall, streaks of silver-white sword light were like shooting stars that streaked across the sky. They were ethereal and had a sharpness that made one's heart palpitate. The silver-white sword light slashed onto the black sword testing stone. Immediately, faint marks were left on the surface of the sword testing stone. After 10 breaths of time, the marks slowly disappeared and the sword testing stone returned to its original state. With such a sword testing stone, one could display their attacking power to their heart's content when practicing swordsmanship. They could unleash their power without restraint, and it could achieve a better effect. This sword testing stone that could recover automatically and could not be damaged by a sword saint's sword. Its value was immeasurable. After practicing his swordsmanship, Chu Mu practiced the flying heavens sword driving technique for a while. Streaks of sword light flew out under his control. They constantly attacked the sword testing stone from various angles and postures. They were either stabbing, slashing, or hacking. After that, he entered the cultivation hall to practice the divine wilderness sword art. As for the astral calamity cultivation method, he had to break through his physique and reach the nirvana realm before he could practice the second level. But to break through to the nirvana realm was not that easy. For example, the captain of the 8th battle team of the Sword Vanguard ship had been stuck at the peak of 9-star for many years. He had constantly accumulated, and finally he went into seclusion to break through. Chapter 1182. Subordinate Jiang Tao. Subordinate Feng Zimu. Greetings, 10th son of God. In the main hall of the Zhantian Palace, Chu Mu sat on the main seat. Below him, there was a group of people lined up in an orderly manner. There were 2 people in the lead. One was an old man, the other was a middle-aged man. Behind them, there was a group of people, a total of 26 people. Please rise. Sitting in a high position, Chu Mu looked down at these 26 people. He knew that he was in control of their fates. Whether they lived or died, they were all under his control. Thank you, Son of God. As if they had gone through countless training, their voices were in unison, grand and imposing. Introduce yourselves. Chu Mu said indifferently. The arrival of these people didn't surprise him because Zui had told him before that other than the Tao protectors, there would be a group of people who would come to serve him, or in other words, people who would serve him. Jiang Tao started the introductions. These 26 people were actually divided into 2 teams, led by Jiang Tao and Feng Zimu. The simple division was the inner and outer teams. Jiang Tao's team was in charge of the inner team, while Feng Zimu's team was in charge of the outer team. A more detailed division was that Jiang Tao was like the housekeeper of this heaven-rumbling hall, in charge of management, as well as the deployment of the 12 people under him. Feng Zimu, on the other hand, was a guard leading the 12 swordsmen under him to protect the safety of the heaven-rumbling hall and eliminate all threats. In terms of strength, Feng Zimu's team was at the top. Feng Zimu was a 7-time Nirvana Realm swordsman, which meant that he was at the 7th sky of Nirvana Realm. He was very powerful and could survive in the main divine palace. His strength was much stronger than many 7th sky of Nirvana Realm swordsmen outside. As for the 12 members of Feng Zimu's team, each of them had a cultivation base at the 6th sky of Nirvana Realm. Their strength was also much stronger than most of the 6th sky of Nirvana Realm swordsmen outside. Such a team was led by 7th sky of Nirvana Realm swordsmen and 12 6th sky of Nirvana Realm swordsmen. Moreover, they had cultivated a powerful battle formation. Their strength was very terrifying. As long as the opponent was not a sword saint, it would be difficult for anyone to destroy such a team. Feng Zimu's duty was to lead his team to patrol this floating island that Chu Mu had named Zhentian. Of course, patrolling didn't have to be done in person. Using the power of divine sense was also possible. On the other hand, Jiang Tao's team was inferior to Feng Zimu's team in terms of strength. Although they were lacking, they possessed various abilities that Feng Zimu's team did not possess. Jiang Tao's cultivation was only at the 5th sky of Nirvana Realm. In terms of strength, he was far inferior to any of the members of Feng Zimu's team. However, his ability was to manage everything in an orderly manner. Usually, if a friend came to Chu Mu, he would receive them first. As for the other 12 people in Jiang Tao's team, the highest cultivation was at the 3rd sky of Nirvana Realm, while the lowest was at the 1st sky of Nirvana Realm. However, among these 12 people, 2 of them possessed the ability to grow spiritual herbs, spiritual plants, and so on. They were born with this talent, and coupled with the nurturing after birth, they possessed extraordinary attainments. Therefore, the spiritual fields in Zhantian Palace were given to the 2 of them to manage. The other 2 had the ability to deal with ores and metals, and the growth of ores and metals in the mines were given to the 2 of them. 2 of them were experts in refining elixirs, and were closer to the 2 who were experts in growing spiritual plants. The 2 who were experts in forging swords were closer to the 2 who were experts in growing ores and metals. As for the remaining 4, 2 were experts in cooking, while the other 2 were experts in brewing wine. Although after cultivating to a certain level, one could still survive without eating or drinking. Eating had always been a pursuit of humans. Since they were ordinary people, this pursuit was also a kind of instinct. Even if there were many Saint Realm experts, they would not reject good food and wine. In fact, many of them were fond of this path. Moreover, if friends came to entertain them with good food and wine, they could enjoy the food and wine while chatting. This was also a wonderful thing. In this way, all kinds of personnel were basically present. What Chumu needed to do was to cultivate diligently and work hard to improve his cultivation and strength. In the future, he would contribute his strength to the rise of the human race again. The human race had declined, but they had never forgotten the glory of the past. They had been working hard to rise again and return to the glory of the past. From now on, your team will be called the Swordsman Zhen Tian Palace Guard, Chumu said to Feng Zimu and the others. Yes, Your Highness, Feng Zimu and his team members replied in unison. They were sent by the main divine hall to serve Chumu. Simply put, from now on, their fates were closely related to Chumu. If Chumu were to achieve great things, they would naturally receive corresponding benefits. At the very least, they would be respected by others. No one could see through fame and fortune, not even Saint Realm experts. Even gods had their own pursuits, and if Chumu did not achieve anything, they would also be reduced to mediocrity. There was no other way. From the moment they were trained by the main divine hall, they were destined to embark on such a path. After getting to know each other, everyone bowed to Chumu and then left to perform their respective duties. Sitting in the main seat of the hall, Chumu felt that everything in the hall was under his control. He had a feeling that he was in control of everything. The 10th divine child. This was an extremely resounding title and also an unparalleled honor. As far as he knew, the main divine hall master, deputy main divine hall master, and the elders were all divine children in their previous lives. In other words, if this continued in the future, even if he could not become the main divine hall master, he could at least become an elder of the main divine hall. It should be known that the status of an elder of the main divine hall was above that of the main divine hall master. However, that was a matter for the future. No matter how great the honor of being a divine child was, no matter how broad the future path would be after becoming a divine child, Chumu did not let it go to his head. He did not forget the fact that he was a divine child. The fact was that he was a sword of Gojosian, whose cultivation was at the first heaven of the creation realm and who was at the peak of the 9-star body, refining realm. Although he possessed the divine level sword will and had also mastered the power of the rules of space at the microscopic level, his talent far exceeded that of others. However, his strength was really not strong enough. Even some of the more mediocre Nirvana realm swordsmen could easily kill him. Therefore, the most important thing now was to increase his strength. Strength was composed of many parts, and cultivation was one of them. If he could quickly increase his cultivation to the 9th heaven of the creation realm, then with the combination of chi cultivation and body refining, Chumu's strength would reach a terrifying height. At the very least, it would not be impossible for him to run amok in the king realm. In addition to increasing his cultivation, there were also various ways to cultivate more powerful sword techniques, break through the body refining realm, reach the nirvana realm, and so on. It was worth mentioning that Chumu's first unique skill, the void sword chi, had been recultivated because his cultivation had been restored to the first heaven of the creation realm. A strand of silvery white hair, like a small dragon, was lurking in the Dantian lake. The golden Dantian lake and the silvery white void sword chi were unusually eye-catching. Now, the most important thing for me to do is to restore my cultivation, Chumu said to himself. The cultivation plan in his heart gradually became clear. He got up and left the main hall. After informing Jiang Tao, he went to the transmission hall and activated the transmission formation. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from the transmission formation. In the next moment, Chu Mu appeared in the transmission formation of the main divine hall. Your Highness, the 10th Son of God. The swordsman in charge of the transmission formation bowed to Chu Mu. Chu Mu also nodded to him and left the transmission hall, heading to his destination, the profound vitality hall. In the main divine hall, there are various sacred places for cultivation, and the profound vitality hall was one of them. To the main divine hall, a true genius should not waste time on constantly cultivating sword origin, but should focus on increasing his true strength. This was because cultivation did not completely equate to strength. The strength of a swordsman was directly related to various aspects, and battle talent and battle experience were the most important. No matter how high one's cultivation was, no matter how strong one's strength was, without experiencing countless battles of life and death, it was all just empty talk. Therefore, the strategy of the Heavenly Sword Hall to cultivate a true genius had always been to increase one's state of mind and battle experience. As long as one's state of mind and battle experience were improved, then there would be corresponding ways to increase one's cultivation and other aspects quickly. The profound vitality hall was one of the sacred places for cultivation that was used to assist in increasing one's cultivation. Cultivating in the profound vitality hall could increase one's cultivation to the limit of one state of mind in a short period of time. Chu Mu was the 10th Son of God, so he had the right to enter the profound vitality hall at any time. Chu Mu's purpose was also very clear, which was to use the profound vitality hall to quickly restore his cultivation to the 6th heaven of creation. It would be best if he could break through the 6th heaven of creation and reach the 7th, 8th, or even 9th heaven. I can only enter the profound vitality hall once in a short period of time, Chu Mu said to himself as he walked to the entrance of the profound vitality hall. Every sacred place for cultivation had a corresponding person in charge of managing it, and naturally there was one in the profound vitality hall. Your Highness, the 10th Son of God. As soon as Chu Mu arrived, the deacon of the profound vitality hall immediately bowed to him. After the Grand Hall Master of the General Divine Hall sent out the news, every swordsman in the General Divine Hall knew what Chu Mu looked like. They could recognize him at a glance. Sorry to trouble you, but I want to enter the profound vitality hall. Chu Mu nodded and said faintly, Okay, I will open it for you now. The deacon said immediately and opened the door of the profound vitality hall. It was pitch black, as if it led to another world. Thank you, Chu Mu said to the deacon. Immediately he stepped forward and his figure flashed, directly entering the profound vitality hall. When Chu Mu's figure disappeared, the deacon closed the door of the profound vitality hall. Then he reported the news that Chu Mu had entered the profound vitality hall. The elders of the General Divine Hall, the Deputy Grand Hall Master, the Grand Hall Master, and the others all knew about it. Chapter 1183. This kid entered the Hall of Essence so quickly. His physique cultivation base is at the peak of 9 stars, and his chi cultivation base is at the 1st heaven of creation realm. He must have restarted his chi cultivation after receiving an extraordinary inheritance in the trial realm. However, he didn't wait for his cultivation base to recover before going to the Hall of Essence. This kid's talent is extraordinary, and his temperament is extraordinary. I wonder what his state of mind is like. This kid's physique cultivation base is at the peak of 9 stars. He can definitely withstand the impact of the pure energy in the Hall of Essence for a certain period of time. I wonder what his state of mind is like, and what level can it reach. After learning that Chu Mu had entered the Hall of Essence, the elders began to speculate. Among the top 10 chosen, Chu Mu, the 10th chosen, was the lowest in terms of cultivation base and strength. However, in terms of talent, he was the highest. At the very least, his sword intent and the power of laws had reached the high level of the divine realm. Even the first chosen, Guanlin, couldn't compare to him. Therefore, the elders all believed that Chu Mu's future achievements wouldn't be inferior to the other chosen, and might even surpass them. Therefore, their attention towards Chumu naturally increased by a lot. Other than these elders, there were also many people who were paying attention to Chumu, such as the other chosen. This kid actually went to the Hall of Essence so quickly. The ninth chosen, Feng Guohai, muttered. After he left the trial realm and returned to the main shrine, he immediately went into seclusion like the other chosen. Firstly, he wanted to digest the experience of the trial realm, and secondly, he wanted to sort out the inheritance he had received and consolidate his cultivation base. After he came out of seclusion, he received the news, and so did the other chosen, regarding Chumu and the 10th chosen. Feng Guohai immediately inquired about Chumu's levitating island and rushed over. In the end, he was told by Jiang Tao that Chumu had gone to the Hall of Essence, leaving him with nothing to show for it. I wonder what level this kid's cultivation base will reach after he comes out of the Hall of Essence. Feng Guohai wondered to himself as he walked out of the Zhantian Hall. He knew that Chumu's cultivation was at the 6th firmament of creation, but he did not know that Chumu had recultivated. However, he could only raise his cultivation to the 7th, 8th, and 9th firmament. If one's state of mind was strong enough and their body was able to withstand the impact of the pure origin energy in the origin essence hall, they could definitely reach the peak of the 9th heaven of creation realm. As for the nirvana realm, no matter how high one's state of mind was or how strong one's endurance was, they would not be able to break through. This was because the nirvana realm and the creation realm were completely different. If one wanted to break through, they would need to meet certain conditions. Chumu, who was in the Essence Yuan Hall, did not know what the people outside were thinking. The Essence Yuan Hall was filled with rich and pure origin energy. The origin energy seemed to have liquefied, making Chumu feel like he was in a lake. Pure origin energy was everywhere. As soon as Chumu entered the Essence Yuan Hall, he was immediately surrounded by the rich and pure origin energy. The pure, liquefied origin energy did not even need to be absorbed by Chumu as it seeped into Chumu's body through his pores, as if it was going to make Chumu explode. For the first time, Chumu felt that there was a place with such rich and pure origin energy. He was shocked. After the shock was ecstasy. No wonder it was said that as long as one's state of mind was strong enough and their body could withstand it, they could raise their cultivation in a short period of time. In here, Chumu was sure that his cultivation would soon recover to the 6th heaven of creation realm, and then continue to rise. Even if his Dantian was different from other swordsmen, even if he needed more energy for every breakthrough, in the Essence Yuan Hall, which was an unparalleled cultivation environment, he could still raise his cultivation rapidly in a short period of time. Without wasting time or thinking too much, Chumu walked to the center of the Essence Yuan Hall and sat down cross-legged. He removed all distracting thoughts and immediately activated the Divine Wilderness Sword Manual. Immediately, the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence flowed out from his Dantian and circulated through his entire body. At this moment, his body was already filled with pure and rich origin energy that was close to being liquefied. Even his meridians were filled with this origin energy. When the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence circulated, it was difficult to block it, like water flowing through a blocked canal. But with every inch it advanced, a portion of the origin energy was absorbed by the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence. It was quickly refined into the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence, causing the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence to grow stronger. With the addition of fresh energy, the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence circulated faster and faster. The refining efficiency also gradually increased. Chumu could clearly feel that his cultivation was recovering at a high speed. His body trembled, and the Divine Wilderness Sword Essence circulated faster. His cultivation had successfully recovered from the 1st heaven of creation realm to the 2nd heaven of creation realm. The origin energy in the Essence Yuan Hall was too rich and pure. It continuously surged into his body, and Chumu did not even need to take the initiative to absorb it. He only needed to focus 100% of his attention on refining the origin energy. Unknowingly, the efficiency increased by 30% and the refining speed became even faster. Time slowly passed. Chu Mu was completely enveloped by the rich and pure origin energy that was close to being liquefied. It was as if he had disappeared. He did not dare to be distracted. He only had one thought, and that was to refine, 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 refine. Intermediate second heaven of creation realm. Advanced second heaven of creation realm. Peak second heaven of creation realm. After a slight pause, it was as if a flood had broken through a dam. With a rumbling sound, Chu Mu's body shook again. In an instant, a large amount of yuan power was refined, replenished, and broken through. Initial third heaven of creation realm. In an instant, his cultivation at the early stage of the third heaven of creation realm was consolidated, and he charged towards the middle stage of the third heaven of creation realm. The speed of the recovery of his cultivation was beyond Chu Mu's imagination and expectations. If he was in the outside world, the efficiency of using a mid-grade primordial elixir could not be compared to this. There was no fastest, only faster. Not long after, Chu Mu's cultivation recovered to the peak third heaven of creation realm. After a slight pause, the origin energy seemed to solidify in his body. Then, with a loud bang, a large amount of origin energy was refined in an instant, causing the origin energy from the outside world to surge into his body and form a gust of wind. Initial fourth heaven of creation realm. Once he broke through, it was immediately consolidated due to the rich and pure origin energy. The origin energy here was not only rich, but also frighteningly pure. There was no need to remove the impurities. After one circulation, it could be quickly refined into sword essence without any delay. Unknowingly, a day had passed. Chu Mu's cultivation recovered to the peak fourth heaven of creation realm. On the second day, Chu Mu's cultivation recovered to the initial fifth heaven of creation realm and continued to improve. At the end of the second day, his body trembled again, and his cultivation recovered once more. Finally, he reached the initial sixth heaven of creation realm. Initial sixth heaven of creation realm. This was Chu Mu's cultivation before he recultivated. In other words, his cultivation had completely recovered. Moreover, he was certain that the power of the divine wilderness sword essence of initial sixth heaven of creation realm, who had cultivated the complete divine wilderness sword art, was obviously superior to the initial sixth heaven of creation realm. However, this was not enough. The origin energy in the vital essence hall seemed to be endless. It surged from all directions and continuously poured into the vital essence hall. The origin energy was rapidly refined and gathered by the operating array, becoming rich and pure. Then it automatically surged into Chu Mu's body. I want to rush up to the ninth heaven in one go. After his cultivation recovered to the initial sixth heaven of creation realm, Chu Mu became slightly more clear-headed. He felt a burst of joy in his heart, followed by a sense of pride. In terms of state of mind, he was already strong enough. The only thing he lacked was sufficient energy. But now he had enough energy. This was an excellent opportunity. If he missed it, he would have to spend even more time cultivating. As for the vital essence hall, although he could enter it many times in his lifetime, he would have to wait for a considerable amount of time for the next time he entered. He was filled with pride. The efficiency of refining the divine wilderness sword essence of the initial sixth heaven of creation realm was more than 10 times that of the first heaven of creation realm. 2 hours later, his cultivation increased to the intermediate sixth heaven of creation realm. Another 6 hours later, his cultivation increased again to the advanced sixth heaven of creation realm. This was because Chu Mu's dantian was different from ordinary people's. Every breakthrough required 10 times the energy. Otherwise, it would be even faster. In the past 12 hours, Chu Mu's cultivation had reached the peak sixth heaven of creation realm. In this way, a total of 20 hours passed. Chu Mu's cultivation rose from the initial stage of the sixth heavenly layer of creation to the peak of the sixth heavenly layer of creation. His body trembled. This time, the rumbling sound coming from his body was even louder than before. Seventh heaven of creation realm. The unprecedentedly powerful divine wilderness, sword essence, rushed through his meridians and flowed endlessly. This was the third day since Chu Mu entered the essence, Yuan Hall. On the fourth day, Chu Mu was still cultivating. His body could still withstand the impact of the Yuan Qi. The body's endurance was mainly the endurance of the meridians. Everything had a limit. The only difference was the level. Due to body tempering, Chu Mu's meridians were extremely tough and could withstand the impact of large amounts of energy for a long period of time. However, there was also a limit. If the limit was exceeded, the meridians would be damaged. This was the reason why everyone could only enter the essence Yuan Hall to cultivate once in a short period of time. Enduring the impact of large amounts of energy for a long period of time would cause an obvious burden on the meridians. They had to rest for a period of time and let the burden gradually disappear before they could enter a second time. Otherwise, their meridians would be damaged. The higher one's cultivation, the more energy was needed to increase it. This time, it took a total of 10 hours for Chu Mu's cultivation to break through from the initial seventh heaven of creation realm to the intermediate seventh heaven of creation realm, advanced seventh heaven of creation realm, peak seventh heaven of creation realm, eighth heaven of creation realm. As his cultivation soared, Chu Mu forgot about time and everything in the outside world. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to improve. Constantly improve. Ninth heaven of creation realm. At this point, Chu Mu began to feel his meridians expanding. However, he did not give up and continued to persevere. He wanted to rush to the peak ninth heaven of creation realm. Chapter 1184. This fluctuation is, inside the main hall, the elders and the others all felt a strong fluctuation of heaven and earth Yuan Qi. It was continuously gathering at a certain place. Above the essence Yuan Hall, a strange scene appeared. Large amounts of heaven and earth Yuan Qi gathered from all directions and continuously poured into the essence Yuan Hall. Above the essence Yuan Hall, because the heaven and earth Yuan Qi was too dense, it formed a Yuan Qi cloud. The Yuan Qi cloud was like a funnel that connected to the top of the essence Yuan Hall. Extremely rich heaven and earth Yuan Qi constantly poured into the essence Yuan Hall. Then, through the array seals in the essence Yuan Hall, it was refined and purified again and again, becoming extremely pure. The entire Sword God's floating island was covered with countless seals and arrays. There were defensive, offensive, and auxiliary arrays. For example, they absorbed energy from the vast starry sky and transformed it into Yuan Qi that swordsmen needed to cultivate. The essence Yuan Hall was the central area and was one of the places that absorbed the most Yuan Qi. Chu Mu, who was in the essence Yuan Hall, was still circulating the divine wilderness sword manual. He was constantly refining pure Yuan Qi and transforming it into divine wilderness sword essence. Middle ninth heaven creation realm. The swelling of his meridians became more and more obvious. Chu Mu knew that after a long period of pure Yuan Qi flooding his meridians, the load on his meridians was gradually reaching its limit. At this moment, Chu Mu was resisting the swelling of his meridians. There was only one chance to enter the essence Yuan Hall. If he could not cultivate to the peak of the ninth heaven, the next time he entered, he might reach the peak of the ninth heaven. His strong willpower came into play at this moment. Yuan Qi constantly poured into his body and filled his meridians. The divine wilderness sword essence constantly circulated and refined Yuan Qi, causing the sword essence to grow stronger. At the same time, it also increased the load on his meridians. Late ninth heaven creation realm. Chu Mu began to feel that other than the swelling of his meridians, there was also a slight pain, as if they were gradually being torn apart. Late ninth heaven creation realm. Just one step away from the peak. The swelling of his meridians became more and more intense, gradually making Chumu feel that it was unbearable. As he continued to refine Yuan Qi, the divine wilderness sword essence increased bit by bit. It was as slow as a snail crawling. Just a little more, just a little more. Suddenly, all the meridians in his body tightened and expanded to their limits, as though they were about to explode. The divine wilderness sword essence was refined once, and it instantly expanded. Peak of the 9th heavenly layer of fate. At this point, the pain in his meridians became increasingly intense. Chumu knew that if this continued, his meridians would be damaged. With a thought, the divine wilderness sword essence quickly entered his dantian. Chumu immediately stood up and walked out of the essence hall. The divine wilderness sword essence, at the peak of the 9th heaven of creation realm, far surpassed the 6th heaven of creation realm in both quality and quantity. At this moment, Chumu's Qi refinement battle power was not inferior to that of a body refinement battle power. Your Highness, your cultivation is actually... The deacon of the Essence Yuan Hall was extremely shocked when he saw Chumu appear. When Chumu entered, his cultivation was only at the 1st heaven of creation realm. After he came out, Chumu's cultivation was actually at the peak of the 9th heaven of creation realm. He had directly risen from the lowest level of the creation realm to the highest level. Such a huge leap in cultivation was enough to shock anyone. Chumu smiled at the deacon of the Essence Yuan Hall and left. The deacon of the Essence Yuan Hall quickly reported this matter. When the elders heard about it, they were all very surprised. This kid's state of mind cultivation is actually so high. After leaving the Essence Yuan Hall, Chumu did not directly return to Zhentian Floating Island. Instead, he went to the Divine Armor Hall. A deity could obtain a black iron divine armor for free and did not need to spend a lot of battle merits to exchange for it. Although Chumu's divine army had reached the level of a gold soldier and he had more than 100,000 battle merits from completing missions and killing foreign tribes, it was still not enough to exchange for the most ordinary black iron divine armor. One could imagine how precious and rare a divine armor was. Your Highness, what kind of black iron divine armor do you need? The deacon of the Divine Armor Hall asked. Deacon, what are the differences between black iron divine armor? Chumu asked in return. He did not know much about divine armor. Your Highness, whether it is black iron divine armor, bronze divine armor, silver divine armor, or gold divine armor, they are generally divided into a few types according to the attributes of the divine armor. The deacon explained, there are 7 types of godly equipment: power type godly equipment, speed type godly equipment, recovery type godly equipment, self-healing godly equipment, defensive godly equipment, balanced godly equipment, and energy strengthening godly equipment. Other than that, there are some godly equipment with special abilities, but they are very rare. Take the balanced divine armor as an example. A black iron balanced divine armor can double one's strength and speed, as well as double one's recovery speed, recovery ability, and self-healing ability. The power of the sword origin is also doubled, and it can also increase the defensive power of the protective sword aura by 10 times. As for the strength divine armor, it can increase strength by 10 times, sword origin by 2 times, and protective sword aura by 10 times. However, there is no increase in other aspects. Speed divine armor can increase speed by 10 times, protective sword aura by 10 times, and protective sword aura by 10 times. The deacon of the Divine Armor Hall introduced Chumu in detail with a very good attitude. This was because Chumu was the Divine Armor Hall's deacon. The defensive divine armor had a slight increase in strength, speed, self-healing, and other aspects. However, the most important increase was the protective sword aura, which was 100 times stronger. It could be said that different types of divine armor had different attributes and different functions. However, there was no doubt that having a divine armor could significantly increase one's strength. It was not that there were no special types of divine armor in the main divine hall. However, they were very rare and could not be obtained for free. Chu Mu could only choose a black iron divine armor. He could choose one from the strength divine armor, speed divine armor, defensive divine armor, balance divine armor, self-healing divine armor, and origin strengthening divine armor. Black iron divine armor was suitable for the creation realm or the king realm. It was not very useful for Nirvana realm swordsmen because it was difficult to increase their strength. Bronze divine armor was suitable for Nirvana realm swordsmen. After thinking for a while, Chu Mu made his decision. He cultivated both qi and body cultivation, and he had extremely terrifying power in each aspect. He was very outstanding in all aspects. Therefore, Chu Mu felt that he should choose the balanced black iron divine armor. It could be improved in all aspects. Although the increase in a single aspect was not as good as other types of divine armor, the increase in all aspects, together with Chu Mu's own ability, was enough to increase his strength by several times or even 10 times. After making his choice, the deacon of the Divine Armor Hall soon brought over a black iron balanced divine armor. The entire set of divine armor was made up of 4 parts: the head armor, the body armor, the arm armor, and the leg armor. It looked quite ordinary, and there was nothing special about it. After obtaining a black iron balanced divine armor, Chu Mu left the Divine Armor Hall and went to the teleportation hall. He activated the teleportation formation and returned to his own hall of Jintian. His goal was to refine this new set of black iron grade god equipment. Divine armor had to be refined before it could be used. Otherwise, it would only be a decoration. Even if it was worn, it would not have any effect. He first went to Jiang Tao and was told by Jiang Tao that the 9th Shensi, Feng Guohai, had come to see him. Chu Mu thought for a while and told Jiang Tao that he was going to cultivate in seclusion for a while. If someone came to see him, he would tell them the truth. After entering the cultivation hall, Chu Mu did not cultivate the divine wilderness sword scripture because his meridians were in a state of overload. It would take some time for them to gradually recover. The 4 parts of the divine armor had to be refined one by one. The degree of refinement was divided into minor accomplishment and deshang. Minor accomplishment refinement could only unleash half of the divine armor's power. Deshang refinement could only unleash 100% of the divine armor's power. Furthermore, there would be a buffer period of about 10 breaths of time when using the divine equipment at small success. However, after refining it at large success, one would be able to use the divine equipment in 1 breath of time, which was a difference of 10 times. Of course, he did not expect to be deshang at the beginning of the refinement. He would first refine it at minor accomplishment, and then slowly grind it down until he reached deshang. He picked up the head armor, a black helmet with an exquisite design. Chu Mu's divine sense surrounded the head armor. Then, the divine wilderness sword energy was slowly transported out, infusing it into the head armor at a speed that would not burden his meridians. The divine wilderness sword energy and the divine sense worked together, continuously entering the head armor and coming into contact with the complex core of the head armor, penetrating it bit by bit. This was the initial refinement process. He had to control his strength precisely to prevent it from being too strong and damaging the core. 6 hours later, Chu Mu's divine sense and sword energy finally spread to the core of the head armor. Immediately, there was a close connection between the head armor and the head armor. With a thought, the head armor flew up automatically and covered Chu Mu's head. It quickly adjusted and stuck close to his head. It was incomparably fine, extremely fitting, and there was no sense of discomfort. Picking up the body armor, it was like refining the head armor. However, the body armor was bigger than the head armor and had more cores. Therefore, the time it took to penetrate was longer. It took a full 10 hours before the penetration was complete. The body armor flew up and covered Chu Mu's body. Next was the vambrace, which took more than 6 hours to refine and cover his arms. Finally, it was the leg armor, which took a full 10 hours. about the same time as the body armor. After it was refined, it covered Chu Mu's legs, the head armor, the body armor, the vambrace, and the leg armor. The 4 parts were all refined and covered Chu Mu's body. The jet black color had a trace of coldness and toughness of metal. The close-fitting clothing set off the golden ratio of his body, enough to make people scream. On the head, Chu Mu's eyes were exposed. The other parts of his body were basically covered. However, his nose, mouth, and ears were specially treated and did not hinder him at all. As for his eyes, he could choose whether or not to cover them. Chu Mu could feel that the strength of his body had been strengthened. The sword energy had also been strengthened, and the protective sword aura that he released had also been strengthened. However, this strengthening was only at the small success stage, which was only half of the strength of the divine equipment. Chapter 1185. The refinement of the black iron armor could be absorbed into the body and nurtured, increasing the refinement process bit by bit. Chu Mu, on the other hand, was trying out the 2 steps of putting on the armor. Although it would take 10 breaths to put on the armor after the refinement, it could be shortened if he continued to refine it. He could also put on the armor at the right time. After cultivating for dozens of times, Chu Mu tried to deepen the refinement, but the effect was not obvious. A few days later, he came out of seclusion. Due to the refinement of the armor, his essence, qi, and spirit seemed to have improved a little. He told Jiang Tao to prepare the name cards and send them to the 9 divine children's floating islands first. Sending the name cards first was a formal visit. After all, Chu Mu was a newcomer. It was a form of etiquette to formally visit the divine children one by one. Jiang Tao quickly prepared the name cards and sent them over one by one. The first divine child, Guanlin, the second divine child, Murong Qingfeng, the third divine child, Tuobajan, and the 7th divine child, Luo Qiushan, were cultivating in seclusion. The 4th divine child, Liu, the 5th divine child, Lin Yiming, and the 6th divine child, Songlei, had entered the Nirvana secret realm. The 8th divine child, Luo Qiushan, was not in his temple. Only the 9th divine child, Feng Guohai, received the name card. It could not be helped that they were either cultivating in seclusion or not. However, Chu Mu had already sent the name cards. He had done his part in the etiquette, so there was nothing to be picky about. Since Feng Guohai was here, he would pay him a visit. Among the divine children, the one who had the best relationship with Chu Mu was undoubtedly the 9th divine child, Feng Guohai. They had met several times in the trial world, and it was Feng Guohai who had suggested that he join the Swordlight team. He left Xintian's floating island immediately. He boarded a small starship that belonged to the Zhantian Temple and flew quickly to Feng Guohai's floating island. Feng Guohai's floating island was called Wind Ocean Floating Island. It was also one of the many floating islands around the main temple's Sword God's floating island. It was quite a distance away from Chu Mu's floating island. However, this starship was very fast. It didn't take long for Chu Mu to arrive at the floating island in the Sea of Wind. You are. Chu Mu's starship had just docked when Feng Guohai's sword guard came forward immediately. I am Chu Mu, Chu Mu said. Greetings, Your Highness, the 10th Son of God. The sword guards bowed and said, 9th Shensi has received 10th Shensi's name card. 10th Shensi, please follow me. Feng Guohai's voice rang out as soon as he entered the Wind Ocean Godly Palace. Chu Mu, do you still remember what I said the other day? Feng Guohai walked towards him, chuckling. Chu Mu thought about it. Indeed, Feng Guohai had said that they would meet again before they left the trial world, and that it wouldn't be long. Now that he thought about it, it was true. Congratulations on becoming the 10th Son of God. A gentle voice rang out from the side. Chu Mu looked over and saw that it was the 8th Son of God, Lin Qingyu. It turned out that he had come all the way here. 8th Son of God, 9th Son of God. Chu Mu saluted with his sword in a formal manner. All right. You're the 10th Son of God now. We're good brothers. Feng Guohai said. When they first met, Chumu thought that Feng Guohai was a little aloof. However, they gradually got familiar with each other, especially now that Chumu had become a son of God as well. In terms of status and talent, Chumu was on par with Feng Guohai. Only then did Chumu realize that Feng Guohai's personality was more easygoing. Of course, easygoing was relative. Feng Guohai couldn't be expected to be so friendly to a stranger, especially one who could be killed with a flick of his finger. Be more casual in the future, Lian Qingyu said. Brother Lianqing, brother Feng, Chumu called out. That's more like it. I haven't seen you for a while, and your cultivation base has reached the peak of the 9th star, Feng Guohai said in surprise. Chumu realized that Feng Guohai's cultivation base had reached the peak of the 9th star as well. So had Lian Qingyu. With this, the three of us can join forces, Lian Qingyu said. That's right. Feng Guohai nodded. Join forces. Chumu didn't understand. Our current cultivation base has reached the peak of the creation realm. If we want to improve, we have to break through the realm and reach the nirvana realm. Feng Guohai said, if we want to break through to the nirvana realm, we have to have sufficient nirvana chi to allow our bodies to undergo nirvana successfully. Once we reach the nirvana realm and enter the nirvana secret realm, we'll be able to obtain the nirvana chi quickly. Chumu understood immediately. There were nirvana beasts in the nirvana secret realm. Killing the nirvana beasts would allow one to collect the nirvana chi. Only after absorbing the nirvana chi would one be able to break through to the nirvana realm. Although it wasn't the time for Chumu, Lian Qingyu, or Feng Guohai to break through to the nirvana realm, it didn't stop them from entering the nirvana secret realm to hunt nirvana beasts and collect the nirvana chi. If they had sufficient nirvana chi, they could break through now as well. However, it would be more beneficial for their future cultivation if they spent more time consolidating their cultivation base before breaking through. Besides, it wasn't easy to break through to the nirvana realm. The more stable and solid one's cultivation base was, the higher the success rate. Why don't we depart now and enter the nirvana secret realm? Lian Qingyu suggested. Feng Guohai agreed immediately while Chumu had no objections. They activated the teleportation formation in Feng Guohai's divine palace and headed to the teleportation hall of the main god palace. After leaving the teleportation hall, they went straight to the Nirvana Hall. The entrance to the Nirvana secret realm was in the Nirvana Hall. The Nirvana secret realm was one of the sacred cultivation grounds of the Heavenly Sword Hall. It was an open secret realm where every Heavenly Sword Hall had an entrance. Basically, any swordsman of the main god palace could enter. However, swordsmen whose cultivation base had surpassed the creation realm could not enter. The Nirvana secret realm's purpose was to allow swordsmen who were preparing to break through to the Nirvana realm to obtain the Nirvana chi. It prevented swordsmen of the Nirvana realm from entering to obtain the Nirvana chi and sell it to creation realm swordsmen. At the same time, it was an experience for the creation realm swordsman. It was best to rely on one's own ability to break through to the Nirvana realm. If one's ability was insufficient, it was better not to break through. Most swordsmen who wanted to enter the Nirvana secret realm to hunt Nirvana beasts had to pay a corresponding amount of military merit. The amount of military merit was considerable, but higher-ups of the Heavenly Sword Hall, like Chumu, did not need to pay. It was considered a benefit. The Nirvana Hall was managed by a deacon as well. After greeting Chumu and the other two gods' children, the entrance to the Nirvana secret realm was opened. "Let's go!" Feng Guohai shouted and led the way into the Nirvana secret realm. The Nirvana secret realm was a small world created by the Heavenly Sword Hall's experts. Its purpose was to obtain the Nirvana chi. Once they entered the Nirvana secret realm, Chumu and the other two could feel that the aura here was different from the outside world. Other than the chi of heaven and earth, there was an additional aura that they had never felt before. This kind of strange aura fluctuation gave people a feeling of being reborn, but it was very, very faint. Is this the Nirvana chi? Lien Qingyu asked. It's too faint. Although it can be collected, the efficiency is too low. Feng Guohai tried to extract the nirvana qi in the air, but the efficiency was very low. Let's kill the nirvana beasts. It should be faster, Chumu said. Killing the nirvana beasts and collecting the nirvana qi will definitely be faster. Feng Guohai smiled and said, let's go. Let's find the nirvana beasts to kill. The nirvana secret realm was huge because every creation realm swordsman of the Heavenly Sword Hall was qualified to enter. It was specially created for the purpose of collecting nirvana qi for swordsmen. The nirvana beasts inside were endless. Even if they were killed, they would be reborn somewhere else. In short, there was no need to worry about killing all the nirvana beasts in the nirvana secret realm. In addition, most of the swordsmen had to pay a hefty amount of military merit to enter, so there was an additional restriction. There would not be a situation where a large group of people would enter as they wished, effectively controlling the death rate of the nirvana beasts. It was basically the same as the rate of rebirth, so the nirvana beasts would not die too quickly and cause those who entered the nirvana secret realm to be unable to find any nirvana beasts to kill. Lianqing, Feng Guohai, and Chumu worked together and advanced swiftly in search of the nirvana beasts. Not long after, they encountered a nirvana beast. The shape of the nirvana beast was not fixed. It could have the shape of a spirit beast, or it could have the shape of a tree, or it could have all kinds of strange shapes. The first nirvana beast they encountered was a tree that was more than 10 meters tall. The tree had many branches and patches of dark green leaves. The leaves were half the size of a palm, oval in shape and densely serrated at the edges. The dark brown tree trunk exuded a strange aura. It was the aura of nirvana qi. Kill! With a low growl, Feng Guohai drew his sword. The sword light was like a gust of sea breeze, stirring up waves that rolled towards the tree with a loud rumble. Lianqing Yu drew his sword as well. The sword light was the color of jade. With a slash, the jade-colored sword light sliced through the air like it was cutting through jade. Chu Mu's 5 phase swords were unsheathed. Using the power of qi cultivation, the silver-white sword light flashed, slicing through the air and slicing towards the tree spirit. The attack of 3 9-star pinnacle sword of Gojoseon and an attack with the strength of a divine child was terrifying. Even a true Nirvana realm swordsman would not dare underestimate it. The tree spirit retaliated. A few of its branches shook and lashed out like iron whips. Cracking sounds rang out as the dark brown light shattered Chumu and the other 2's sword light. Then, with a shake, jagged leaves shot out amidst rustling noises. That leaf was incomparably sharp, and its speed was also extremely fast. In an instant, it shot before the 3 of them, causing them to be greatly shocked, and even more so, they felt a sense of horror. There was no need for words. The 3 of them cooperated tacitly, spreading out and swinging their swords to shatter the leaves. Each time they shattered a leaf, they felt a strong, rebounding force, almost causing their swords to fly out of their hands. The 3 of them were shocked. They did not expect the Nirvana beast's ability to be so powerful. The 3 of them attacked the tree spirit from 3 different directions. The tree spirit's branches came from different directions, as if a peerless swordsman was performing an unfathomable swordsmanship with shocking power. Chapter 1186. Wind and thunder rumbled as the sword light spun and tore apart the tree spirit's branches. Menacingly, it approached the tree spirit rapidly. Chu Mu's strongest ability was in close-range combat. In long-range combat, he could only unleash the combat power of qi cultivation. In close-range combat, the combat power of qi cultivation and body cultivation could be combined to become even stronger. As if it could sense the threat from Chu Mu, the tree spirit sent more branches, thorns, and swings at Chu Mu. They were so dense that there was nowhere for him to dodge. Chu Mu moved forward quickly and performed the inch step, shuttling through the gaps between the branches. 8th Shensi, Lien Qingyu and Ninth Shensi, Feng Guohai, unleashed their true abilities as well, performing their powerful heaven-level sword techniques. The sword light was like a raging ocean, like a jade that could break through a city. It was indestructible and indestructible. Branches were cut and leaves were shattered. The terrifying sword light slashed at the tree spirit's trunk. Chu Mu approached the tree spirit, his two swords swinging as he performed the lesser 8 styles of the void shattering. The silvery white sword light crisscrossed and formed a cross on the tree trunk. The Shensi's ability could dominate those of the same level. With 3 Shensi working together, the tree spirit was no match for them, even if it had the ability to surpass an ordinary 9-star pinnacle sword of Gojoseon. There was no flying debris. The slain tree spirit faded rapidly, leaving only a faint aura of chaotic color. It was as thick as a toothpick, floating in the air and exuding a strange energy wave. Nirvana Chi. The 3 of them were overjoyed. 8th brother will keep the Nirvana Chi first. After we leave the Nirvana secret realm and return to Levitating Island, we'll divide it evenly, Feng Guohai said, glancing at Lien Qingyu and then at Chu Mu. Let's do as 9th brother says, Chu Mu said, having no objections. Previously, Chu Mu had addressed Lien Qingyu as brother Lien Qingyu and Feng Guohai as brother Feng. Along the way, Feng Guohai had brought up this matter, stating that the children of God addressed each other as brothers. The first child of God was naturally the eldest, while the second child of God was the second, and so on. Chu Mu was the 10th child of God, and he was the youngest at the end. The more solid a swordsman's foundation was, the more Nirvana Chi was required to break through to the rebirth realm. For example, an ordinary peak 9-star sword of Gojoseon would only need about 100 strands of Nirvana Chi to break through to the Nirvana realm. Then a genius who is only second to the Son of God would need 1,000 strands of Nirvana Chi, and the Son of God would need even more Nirvana Chi to break through. On the other hand, Chi refinement and body refinement had both reached the peak of the 9th-star realm. If one wanted to break through to the Nirvana realm, the amount of Nirvana Chi required would be even greater. It might be in the thousands or even tens of thousands. In addition, the Nirvana Chi would be consumed once it was used. Every subsequent breakthrough in the Nirvana realm would require Nirvana Chi. More Nirvana Chi would increase the power by several times or even tenfold. This Nirvana beast is unexpectedly powerful. It's quite difficult to kill it one-on-one, Lien Qingyu said after putting away the strand of Nirvana Chi. Every Nirvana beast is at least a peak 9-star king level. With the boost from the Nirvana Chi, their abilities are far superior to an ordinary 9-star king level. Feng Guohai said, Nirvana beasts are divided into 4 levels: low, middle, high, and grand Nirvana beast. The one we killed should be a high-level Nirvana beast. Just think about it. When the 3 of them joined forces, they still had to go through a battle before they were able to kill a high-level Nirvana beast. If it was a peak 9th-star Sword King with an ordinary strength, not to mention killing it, it would be entirely possible for him to be killed by a high-level Nirvana beast. However, this Nirvana secret realm belonged to the Heavenly Sword Hall. Those who could enter were all swordsmen of the Heavenly Sword Hall. There was no such thing as ordinary swordsmen of the Heavenly Sword Hall. Those who could enter the Nirvana secret realm for free were all highly valued by the Heavenly Sword Hall. Their abilities were not to be underestimated. Those who were willing to pay a large amount of battle merits to enter the Nirvana secret realm were experienced and had extraordinary abilities. With several people joining forces, it was not difficult to fight a Nirvana beast, as long as they did not encounter a large group of Nirvana beasts. They continued to move forward. Not long after, Chu Mu and the other 2 encountered another Nirvana beast. This time it was 2 Nirvana beasts that looked like apes. They had black fur and were more than 5 meters tall. They were muscular and bulging like 2 small hills, full of pressure. When the 2 black ape demons saw Chu Mu, and the other two, they immediately roared into the sky. Their thick arms beat their chests, making drumming sounds. Then they sprinted towards them. They raised their huge fists, which seemed to cover the sky. A patch of darkness came crashing down abruptly. The terrifying fist force seemed to shatter the vacuum, causing Chu-Mu and the other two's expressions to change. With a loud explosion, the two fists seemed to shatter the void. The fist force forcefully broke open two holes in the hard ground. Their bodies were like the wind, swallows, and sharp arrows. The three of them quickly spread out, avoiding the fist force from different directions and counterattacking. In fact, the Nirvana Beast's abilities were also divided into different levels. It was related to their bodies. Some of the Nirvana Beast's abilities were equivalent to the most ordinary 9-star pinnacle sword of Gojoseon. However, because of the Nirvana Chi, their abilities were increased by several times. Some of the Nirvana Beast's original abilities were the elite 9-star pinnacle sword of Gojoseon. With the Nirvana Chi, their abilities were increased by several times. However, even the weakest Nirvana Beast was several times stronger than the ordinary 9-star pinnacle sword of Gojoseon. The more powerful ones were even dozens of times stronger. The highest level Nirvana Beast even had the powerful abilities of a powerful deity. There were differences in the abilities of deities as well. Chu-Mu would find it difficult to defeat a powerful deity in a one-on-one fight. The two black ape spirits came with great ferocity, their fists shocking. However, they were mid-level Nirvana Beasts, and their abilities were not as strong as the tree spirit from before. Chu-Mu fought one black ape spirit alone, while Lien Qingyu and Feng Guohai worked together to fight the other black ape spirit. The Sword of Wind and Thunder and the Sword of Five Phases were infused with the divine wilderness sword essence. Gold and silver intertwined. As the sword light spun, Chu-Mu's figure was extremely agile. He weaved between the black ape spirit's fists, leaving wounds on the black ape spirit's body with each strike. The black ape spirit's fur was tough and its defense was shocking. If it were not for one's strength, the sharpness of a mid-level sacred sword alone would not be enough to cut through the black ape spirit's fur. As soon as a wound appeared on the black ape spirit's body, the wound could not heal. Instead, it was corroded and deepened by a force at a slow pace. It continued to expand as its life force was drained away. Both swords slashed at the same wound, deepening the wound. With another strike, the black ape spirit's head was severed. It flew high into the air and faded quickly. On the other side, Feng Guohai and Lien Qingyu's expressions changed. They had already killed the black ape spirit before Chu-Mu. The Nirvana Chi of a mid-level Nirvana Beast was much thinner than that of a high-level Nirvana Beast. The Nirvana Chi of a high-level Nirvana Beast was about 10 times that of a mid-level Nirvana Beast. In that case, the Nirvana Chi of a low-level Nirvana Beast should be 10 times less than that of a mid-level Nirvana Beast. An ordinary 9-star pinnacle sword of Gojoseon would need 100 strands of low-level Nirvana Chi to break through to the Nirvana realm. In terms of mid-level Nirvana Chi, it would be 10 strands, and in terms of high-level Nirvana Chi, it would be 1 strand. In that case, the sword of Gojoseon, who was a god's child, would need 10 strands of Nirvana Beast's Nirvana Chi to break through to the Nirvana realm. A god's child like Chu-Mu, who cultivated both Chi and body, would need even more. With Lien Qingyu putting away the 2 strands of mid-level Nirvana Chi, the 3 of them did not expend much energy and did not need to rest. However, Chu-Mu noticed that the 5 manifestation swords and the Sword of Wind and Thunder were rusty and damaged. It was as if they had been eroded by the passage of time and turned from divine weapons to ordinary metal. "Youngest, why is your sword like this?" Feng Guohai pointed at Chu-Mu's sword and asked in surprise. 10th brother's sword. Lien Qingyu also looked at Chu-Mu in surprise. If he wasn't mistaken, those 2 swords should be top-quality middle-grade saint swords. In terms of quality, they shouldn't be inferior to high-grade saint swords. Yet, Such saint swords had actually been reduced to such a state after 2 battles. The sword energy I cultivate is a little special, Chu said, feeling a little helpless. He had spent quite a lot of time cultivating the 5 manifestation swords and the sword of wind and thunder. They had followed him through many battles of life and death, killing many powerful enemies and staining the swords with blood. He had never thought that they would become like this today because of the divine wilderness sword energy. It could be seen from the side that the true divine wilderness sword energy was powerful and possessed a terrifying corrosive ability. What a powerful sword energy, Lien Qingyu sighed. I'll give you 2. Feng Guohai smiled and tossed out 2 swords. Chu Mu put away the 5 manifestation swords and the sword of wind and thunder. The 2 swords had been damaged and could not be repaired due to the corrosion of the divine wilderness sword energy. Chu Mu's current cultivation base was at the peak of the 9th layer of destiny, so he could use high-level sacred swords as well. Actually, Chu Mu had another sword that he could use that did not need to worry about being corroded by the divine wilderness sword energy. It was the sword that he had condensed from the divine wilderness sword seed, which he named the imperishable sword. However, the current imperishable sword was only a low-level sacred sword, comparable to a mid-level sacred sword at best. It was not powerful enough. Of course, he had other sacred swords in his spatial ring as well. The 2 high-level sacred swords that Feng Guohai had given him were no ordinary items either. They were the best of the high-level sacred swords, unusually sharp and made of extraordinary materials. They should be able to last for a while longer, Chu Mu thought to himself. The divine wilderness sword energy was just too domineering, but Chu Mu was very happy. The more domineering the divine wilderness sword energy was, the more powerful it would be, and the more obvious it would increase his strength. Just think about it. After the opponent was attacked by the divine wilderness sword energy, they would immediately be corroded by the divine wilderness sword energy, and their condition would be affected. They would have to divert their attention to defend themselves, which would lead to a decrease in their strength. It was a pity that while killing nirvana beasts could obtain nirvana chi, they could not collect resentment and other negative energies, so the imperishable sword could not continue to grow. With the 2 high-level sacred swords in hand, Chu Mu, Lien Qingyu, and Feng Guohai continued their journey of hunting in the nirvana realm. The 3 of them wanted to break through to the nirvana realm, so they needed a lot of nirvana chi. Chapter 1187. In the nirvana secret realm, there was no alternation between the sun and the moon, nor was there any distinction between night and day. Therefore, it was difficult to sense the passage of time. One could rest when one was tired, but there had to be someone guarding when one rested. Otherwise, one might be caught off guard by the nirvana beast's attack. There were many types of nirvana beasts. It was possible that a giant rock one passed by was a type of nirvana beast. No aura could be sensed at all, but it would attack in an instant. However, those who entered the nirvana secret realm naturally had the corresponding means to sense the passage of time and how much time had passed. It had been a month since Chu Mu, Lien Qingyu, and Feng Guohai had entered the nirvana secret realm. They kept moving forward, encountering nirvana beasts, fighting and killing them to obtain the chi of nirvana. After a month, their harvest was bountiful. There were more than 500 low-level chi of nirvana, more than 200 mid-level chi of nirvana, less than 20 high-level chi of nirvana, and only 1 chi of grand nirvana. Until now, they had only encountered a great nirvana beast. In that battle, the 3 of them had joined forces and practically used all their strength to resist that great nirvana beast. After spending almost 2 hours, they finally tortured that great nirvana beast to death and obtained a strand of great nirvana chi. There seemed to be a lot of chi of nirvana, but it was not enough for Lien Qingyu or Feng Guohai to break through to the nirvana realm. As for Chu Mu, it was even more insufficient. Lien Qingyu and Feng Guohai were meditating and resting, while Chu Mu was in charge of guarding to avoid being attacked. 6 hours later, Lien Qingyu and Feng Guohai finished meditating and recovered their energy. It was their turn to guard while Chumu meditated and rested. When Chumu's energy was fully recovered as well, the three of them did not linger and set off again. Far away, there was a dark shadow, like an enormous ancient beast that lay on the ground in deep slumber. When they got closer, they realized that it was a city, a huge city, an ancient city, a city that emitted a faint chi of nirvana as it was immersed in the chi of nirvana. Nirvana City. A long, long time ago, after the Nirvana mystic realm was opened, the swordsmen who entered the Nirvana mystic realm gathered in one place. In order to make it convenient for them to rest, they gradually formed small camps. As people came and went, some of the small camps were abandoned and disappeared, while others continued to expand. Later on, under the guidance of a swordsman, the largest campsite continued to expand and eventually became a city. This city also continued to improve as time passed and became the current Nirvana City. Nirvana City wasn't just a place for swordsmen who had entered the Nirvana secret realm to rest. It was also a place for trading. One could trade all sorts of precious treasures here. Of course, the currency used for trading was basically Nirvana Chi, Nirvana City of Nirvana, and the Chi of Nirvana was, "We finally see Nirvana City. Let's go and have a good rest," Feng Guohai said with a smile as he quickened his pace. The gates of Nirvana City were open. There were no guards and there was no need for guards. Any swordsman could enter and leave freely. Chu Mu and the other two walked into Nirvana City. The brown walls of Nirvana City were filled with an ancient and weathered aura, as if it had been reborn after a disaster. Although it was weak, it was incomparably resilient. Basically, every swordsman who entered the Nirvana secret realm would stay here for at least a few months. Although Chu Mu and the other two were God's children, not everyone knew them, so their arrival did not attract much attention. "Let's go. Let's find a place to have a few drinks," Feng Guohai said. This was his main purpose. Lien Qingyu was also an item in his cup, so Chu Mu would not refuse. There were no restaurants in Nirvana City. After all, this was the Nirvana secret realm. It was a place for the swordsmen of Heavenly Sword Hall to obtain chi of Nirvana, not a place for enjoyment. Swordsmen who could enter the Nirvana secret realm would not be chefs or waiters, but ordinary people were not qualified to enter. However, there was no lack of houses here, so they could find them anywhere. The three of them found an empty house that was well lit and well ventilated, making it comfortable. Feng Guohai took out a table and chairs from his spatial ring, as well as jade cups, fine wine, and delicacies. He arranged them in a row, and the three of them took out cushions to sit on. When they were hunting Nirvana beasts outside, they did not have the time nor the energy to enjoy themselves. "Eighth brother, ninth brother, you're here too." After drinking and eating, the three of them walked to the street. As they walked, they met some familiar faces. They were the other god's children. The fourth god's child, Liu, the fifth god's child, Lin Yiming, and the sixth god's child, Songlei. They had entered the Nirvana secret realm earlier than Chu Mu and the other two. The one who spoke was the sixth god's child, Songlei. Fourth brother, fifth brother, sixth brother, Lien Qingyu and Feng Guohai greeted respectively. Chu Mu addressed them as such as well. "Oh, it's you, Chu Mu." "No, I should call you 10th brother now. Congratulations on becoming the 10th god's child." Songlei and the other two god's children smiled at Chu Mu. "Let's go. Since we've met, I'll treat you to a good meal," said Lin Yiming. "Fifth brother, are you going to?" Songlei's eyes lit up, as did Liu's. Chu Mu and the other two had just eaten their fill. Although they could easily convert food into negligible amounts of energy, and no matter how much they ate, they wouldn't feel bloated. However, they had just eaten a delicious meal and drank a lot of good wine. If they went to eat again, they wouldn't feel as if they were in the mood. However, it was the fifth god's child, Lin Yiming's kind intentions. In addition, they could meet the three gods' children and interact with each other. However, Chu Mu and the other two gods' children soon realized that their previous thoughts were too laughable. The food and wine they had eaten before were really ordinary. There was nothing to compare. It was a restaurant, an ordinary-looking restaurant with only one floor. When Chu Mu and the other 5 gods' children approached the restaurant, they smelled a fragrance. "What is this smell?" Feng Guohai sniffed and exclaimed softly, "Why is it so fragrant?" Chu Mu felt his appetite being aroused once again when he smelled the fragrance. It was as if he had not eaten for a long time and suddenly saw a rich delicacy appear in front of him. "You will definitely remember it," said Lin Yiming with a smile, his eyes shining. The 6 of them strode into the restaurant. This simple and crude restaurant only had one floor, and there were only 12 tables. Every single table was filled with people, and it was completely packed. "Let's wait for a while." Lin Yiming was very familiar with the situation. His bright eyes scanned the place to see which table was about to finish eating and was ready to take the table. Like Lin Yiming, there were a few groups of people who were staring at the restaurant with wide eyes. "Wait, we have to be quick, or else the table will be taken away. We have to wait." Lin Yiming transmitted his voice to the others as if he was very familiar with the situation. Chu Mu and the other 2 gods' children were speechless. To think that they, as dignified divine children, would actually run to such a simple and crude restaurant to wait for a table. They even had to fight with others for a table. Tears were streaming down their faces, and they wanted to turn around and run away. However, when they smelled the endless fragrance and saw the exquisite dishes on each table that could be called art, they wanted to try them and see how delicious they were. They waited for almost half an hour before a table of swordsmen stood up to leave. With a swoosh, Lin Yiming unleashed his unparalleled speed and fought with the others. The speed of a divine child was fully displayed at this moment. Lin Yiming sat down. Li Yu and Song Lei sat down as well, taking the table before the others. The others were still a short distance away from the table. The distance of a few centimeters was so close yet so far. The expressions on their faces were filled with despair, as if they had lost the most important thing. 8th brother, 9th brother, 10th brother, come. Lin Yiming called out. Chu Mu and the other 2 also sat down and stared at the many sorrowful gazes. "Give us a serving of unsetting sun," Lin Yiming said. Suddenly, countless gazes came from all around. They were shocked, amazed, and envious. Li Yu and Song Lei were stunned. Chu Mu and the other 2 looked at each other, not understanding what was going on. There are 4 grades of spiritual food here. The lowest grade is called Bright Star, the middle grade is called Blazing Silver Moon, and the high grade is called Unsetting Sunday, Lin Yiming explained. A portion of resplendent starlight requires 10 strands of low-level nirvana chi. A portion of Blazing Silver Moon requires 100 strands of low-level nirvana chi, and a portion of Unsetting Blazing Sun requires 1,000 strands of low-level nirvana chi. When Chu Mu and the other 2 heard this, they were all stunned. To eat, one actually had to pay nirvana chi, even if it was low-grade. A serving of Unsetting Sun required 1,000 low-grade nirvana chi. It sounded like it was going to scare them to death. The owner of this restaurant is also a spiritual food chef. He has the strength of a peak 9-star and comes from a spiritual food family. His culinary skills are extraordinary and can be said to be a grandmaster. His ingredients are all rare treasures and the flesh of king-level spiritual beasts. The grandmaster's craftsmanship and the top ingredients created an unparalleled delicacy. After eating it, I guarantee that you will never forget it for the rest of your life, Lin Yiming said. He had already eaten it once. Perhaps to an ordinary peak 9-star sort of Gojosian, 1,000 low-grade nirvana chi was a lot, but to a godson like Lin Yiming, 1,000 low-grade nirvana chi was nothing. Not long after, the delicacies of Unsetting Sun were served. There were a total of 8 dishes, 2 soups, and a jar of wine. The aroma overflowed and assaulted the nose, causing Chu Mu and the others to be intoxicated. It was as if they had entered a fairyland and couldn't wake up for a long time. Come, let's eat. Lin Yiming called out and was incomparably intoxicated. Chu Mu discovered that Lin Yiming was the real glutton, a delicacy worth 1,000 low-grade nirvana chi, 8 dishes, 2 soups, and a jar of wine. This price was really frightening. Chu Mu and the other two also stretched out their chopsticks. Chapter 1188. The taste of the unsetting blazing sun was truly beautiful to the extreme. Chu Mu and the other 5 practically fought to finish it. Their mouths were full of fragrance, and even their bodies seemed to emit waves of unique, mixed fragrances that left endless aftertastes. After eating, the 6 of them felt a warm feeling coming from the inside of their bodies. Their blood flowed faster, but they didn't feel uncomfortable. Instead, there was an indescribable sense of comfort. Chu Mu could feel a surge of power in his body, like endless waves. This power seemed to be beyond his limits. His essence, chi, and spirit were also greatly strengthened. His whole person was in a very high state. Chu Mu felt that his strength was now more than 30% stronger than before eating the spiritual food. This was not an illusion, but a real power. It was the power brought by the spiritual food. After eating, Chu Mu and the others felt that 1,000 streams of low-level nirvana chi was indeed worth it. For them, a 30% increase in strength without any side effects, and they could feel that their cultivation had been strengthened a little. This was very rare. They just didn't know how long this 30% increase in strength would last. In fact, in the age of God, spiritual food masters were the same as alchemists. The spiritual food they made had all kinds of effects, and they didn't have any side effects. They also didn't leave behind any elixir toxins like elixirs. Lin Yiming said, the 6 of them walked to the street of Nirvana City. But after the War of the Gods and the destruction of the world's core, the lineage of spiritual food masters was almost cut off. Now, there are very few spiritual food masters left. The Yang family of the Divine Sword Star Field's Luo Shui galaxy is one of the remaining lineages. Lin Yiming said, the spiritual food we just ate was made by Yang Zongshua of the Yang family. Spiritual food masters in the Age of Gods coexisted with alchemists. Because of the destruction of the gods and the destruction of the world's core, they were greatly affected. A large number of inheritances disappeared, resulting in only a few lineages of spiritual food masters existing in the ancient god world. In places like the Archean world, their inheritances were completely cut off. So it's the Yang family. I remember that second brother once tried to recruit the Yang family, but he was rejected. Lien Qingyu suddenly said, having a spirit food master as a follower was indeed a kind of honor, and it also had great benefits. However, the few remaining spiritual food masters were heavily protected by the Heavenly Sword Hall. Unless they were willing, no one could force them to follow anyone, not even the deity. The power of this meal lasted for a full 6 hours before disappearing. Using Nirvana City as a base, Chu Mu and the others once again left Nirvana City and entered the wilderness to hunt Nirvana beasts. Their purpose in entering the Nirvana secret realm was to obtain Nirvana Chi. Lien Qingyu, Feng Guohai, Chu Mu, Liu, Lin Yiming, and Song Lei formed a new team. However, before they formed the new team, Lien Qingyu divided the Nirvana Chi they hunted equally. The newly formed team had 6 shensis, and they were even more powerful. Even if they encountered a powerful grand Nirvana beast, they would be able to kill it in a short period of time. People came and left. Nirvana City was never short of people. The constant flow of people made this ancient city full of vitality. Another month passed. Chu Mu and the other 5 worked together and killed thousands of Nirvana beasts again. They obtained a lot of low-level, mid-level, and high-level Nirvana Chi, but they didn't obtain any Nirvana Chi from grand Nirvana beasts. After all, there weren't many grand Nirvana beasts. On this day, a storm suddenly appeared out of nowhere in the Nirvana secret realm. It was a blazing storm that came from afar and left in a grandiose manner. The storm was in the color of chaos. Wave after wave, it surged like a tidal wave, about to engulf the entire Nirvana secret realm. When the chaotic air rushed in, the sword of Gojosian, who were hunting Nirvana beasts outside, changed their expressions. This is the Nirvana tide. The Nirvana tide is here. Return to the city quickly. The shouts were filled with panic, excitement, and hope. The sword of Gojosian moved and quickly returned to Nirvana City. The Nirvana beasts that were swept by the Nirvana tide seemed to have been immobilized by the Nirvana art and were unable to move. However, the aura emitted from their bodies became stronger and stronger. In the end, it actually formed a faint flame that was like a burning flame that swayed on their bodies. The Nirvana beasts roared and moved. More and more Nirvana beasts gathered and formed a huge army of Nirvana beasts. They rushed in the direction of Nirvana City. The earth trembled and rumbled. A terrifying aura swept out and mixed with the Nirvana tide, sweeping across everything. Some of the sword of Gojosian were far away from Nirvana City and couldn't return to Nirvana City in time. They could only try their best to avoid being attacked by the army of Nirvana beasts. A single Nirvana beast was powerful. A group of Nirvana beasts was even more terrifying. What is going on? Chumu was shocked. The 6 of them rushed in the direction of Nirvana City. Nirvana tide, this is the Nirvana tide. Liyu's face was solemn as she said, "A Nirvana tide will appear in the Nirvana secret realm every once in a while. Every time a Nirvana tide occurs, the strength of the Nirvana beasts will increase significantly. Moreover, they will become even crazier and attack other life forms other than the Nirvana beasts. However, there is an advantage. The Nirvana chi in the bodies of the crazy Nirvana beasts will be stronger than before. I remember that besides this, there is another benefit. A Nirvana heavenly tablet will appear in Nirvana City. It will be used to record the records of the Nirvana beasts killed by the top 100 Sword Kings during this Nirvana tide. The top 10 will be rewarded." What reward? It seems to be related to Nirvana chi. The few of them spoke as they rushed in the direction of Nirvana City. Even if they were God's sons and had powerful strength, they were still insignificant in the face of such a crazy and powerful army of Nirvana beasts. It was like comparing a man's strength to nature's strength. The 6 of them were fast, but the Nirvana beasts weren't slow either. As they ran, the Nirvana beasts rushed over like a huge flood and forced the 6 of them to separate. "Be careful. See you in Nirvana City." The 6 of them roared and killed the Nirvana beasts that were attacking them. They instantly collected the Nirvana chi and flew at a low altitude while dodging the attacks. Under the influence of the Nirvana tide, they couldn't fly up to the sky. At most, they could fly at a low altitude of around 10 meters. Some Nirvana beasts could fly as well. With 2 upper-grade sacred swords in his hands, 3 sword light revolved around him. Although the flying sky sword-wielding technique wasn't as powerful as the dual sword-wielding technique due to some reasons, it could create a good interference effect. It could also be used to defend against some attacks. Due to the charge of the Nirvana beasts, Chumu was separated from the other 5 deities and was surrounded by many Nirvana beasts. The Nirvana beasts in the surroundings were constantly attacking Chumu, trying to kill him, who wasn't a Nirvana beast. The strength of a low-level Nirvana beast will increase by around 30% after it goes berserk. The strength of a mid-level Nirvana beast will increase by around 40% after it goes berserk. Facing the attacks of the Nirvana beasts, Chumu defended and dodged as he silently calculated the increase in strength of the Nirvana beasts after they went berserk. Chumu didn't dare to prolong the battle, nor did he aim to kill the Nirvana beasts. Although he had the intention to challenge the so-called Nirvana Sky Steel and strive to rank in the top 10, he would be rewarded after the Nirvana tide passed. However, under such circumstances, it wasn't a good choice to fight with the Nirvana beasts. He would first return to Nirvana City, where he could advance and retreat. At that time, he would go all out to kill the Nirvana beasts. However, now that he was in a tight encirclement, the first thing to do was to break out of the encirclement. The dual sword wielding technique was like a torrential storm. The earth-quaking energy exploded, and every sword was vibrating at high speed. The Nirvana beasts that were struck were sent flying, crashing into the other Nirvana beasts, and were severely injured. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu had cleared the area around him with the dual sword wielding technique. As long as he was willing, he could kill the heavily injured Nirvana beasts with a single strike. However, he didn't do so because that would cause him to miss the opportunity to break out of the encirclement. The surroundings were cleared and there was no obstruction. He soared into the sky. Although he could only fly below 10 meters and would encounter the attacks of the flying Nirvana beasts, Chu Mu flew on his sword. He executed the flying sword-wielding technique that he had prepared beforehand. In the blink of an eye, he transformed into an extremely sharp sword light and soared into the sky. The instant Chu Mu transformed into a sword light, the Nirvana beasts that were sent flying once again surrounded him. One by one, they leaped up and pounced towards Chu Mu. The flying Nirvana beasts that possessed wings also spread their wings. Like an eagle pouncing on a rabbit, they clawed at the sword light that Chu Mu had transformed into with their sharp claws. However, Chu Mu's speed was already very fast. After executing the flying sword-wielding technique, his speed increased by several folds. In the blink of an eye, the pouncing attacks of the crazy Nirvana beasts missed. Chu Mu flew past countless crazy Nirvana beasts. The Nirvana beasts also launched their attacks one after another. All kinds of attacks were dodged by Chu Mu, but it was still very dangerous. There were a few times when he almost brushed past the Nirvana beasts. The other 5 Shensis and the other sword of Gojoseon also used their own methods to break free from the encirclement of the Nirvana beasts and rushed towards Nirvana City. Nirvana City's existence wasn't just a stronghold. It was also used to deal with the Nirvana tide. Some of the sword of Gojoseon weren't able to escape in time and were attacked by many crazy Nirvana beasts. Their bodies were torn apart under the attacks of the crazy Nirvana beasts and died miserably. As the sword light flew, Chu Mu activated his fastest speed and got closer to Nirvana City. At the same time, the Nirvana beasts that were charging at the front were also getting closer to Nirvana City. Chapter 1189. After being chased by countless crazy Nirvana beasts, Chu Mu used Flying Sky sword-controlling technique and turned into a blazing sword light that shot towards Nirvana City's city wall. Due to the Nirvana tide, the gate of Nirvana City had been closed to prevent the Nirvana beasts from invading. Many sword kings were standing on the city walls of Nirvana City and looking at the wilderness far away from the city. Countless Nirvana beasts were rushing over like endless tidal waves. Their might was monstrous, like a magnificent army. That terrifying aura and the howling of the gale caused the sword kings on the city walls to be shocked as if they were about to shatter everything. Some of the sword of Gojoseon turned pale as they were shocked by the might of the Nirvana beast army. They were even a little fearful. No matter how many Nirvana beasts there are, they will become the Nirvana chi that we need to break through to the Nirvana realm. A sword king shouted loudly, and his eyes emitted an extremely fierce light. He raised his sword, and the sword energy in his body surged. Numerous cyclones appeared around him, and his imposing aura was constantly rising and condensing, becoming stronger and stronger. He was accumulating power and waiting for the army of Nirvana beasts to come close enough to release a powerful attack. Many of the sword of Gojoseon unsheathed their swords and condensed their aura to prepare for a powerful attack. I will definitely be in the top 10 of the Nirvana Sky Steel. Other than Chu Mu, the other 5 divine princes also used their own methods to break away from the Nirvana beast army and came to the city wall of Nirvana City. 5th brother, 6th brother, 8th brother, 9th brother, and 10th brother. Why don't we compete and see who can kill more Nirvana beasts? Li Yu asked. Sure. No problem. Everyone agreed. No one said anything about who could kill more Nirvana beasts because they were confident that they could be in the top 10 of the Nirvana Sky Steel. Those who killed more Nirvana beasts would naturally be ranked higher. If they couldn't be in the top 10, there was nothing to compete with. As the divine sons of the human tribe, they were the most outstanding and top-notch geniuses among the younger generation of swordsmen of the human tribe. Perhaps there were people who could match up to them, but it was almost impossible to beat them. The 6 divine children stood at different positions on the city wall. The aura around them gradually condensed and increased bit by bit. It was as if an invisible storm was gradually gathering. It could not be seen or felt, but there was a kind of breathtaking heaviness and sharpness that shocked the surrounding Sword of Gojosian. They unconsciously stepped back, otherwise they would feel oppressed. The Nirvana Beast Army was getting closer and closer, and the terrifying aura they emitted was getting more and more intense, as if it was going to destroy the city walls. Don't let the Nirvana beasts attack the city walls. Someone shouted. Once the Nirvana beasts attacked the city wall, no matter how hard the city wall was, it would not be able to withstand the crazy charge of the Nirvana Beast Army. The sound of wind breaking rang out as numerous silhouettes leaped up and descended from the sky, drawing beautiful arcs as they landed one after another. Their swords reflected a cold light as they cleaved apart the clouds and mist. Kill! A group of Sword of Gojosian descended and waved their swords in the air, displaying sword techniques and sword moves. Wind, thunder, rain, lightning, thunder, stars chasing the moon, flood surging to the sky. In an instant, the first batch of Nirvana beasts that were charging at the front were killed one after another. These Nirvana beasts were almost all low-level Nirvana beasts. Even if they had fallen into a frenzy due to the Nirvana tide, their strength had only increased by about 30%. They were still not comparable to mid-level Nirvana beasts, and were easily killed by the Sword of Gojosian's sword moves. Every Sword of Gojosian here was a peak 9-star Sword of Gojosian. Moreover, they were not ordinary peak 9-star Sword of Gojosian. Each of them was extraordinarily talented and powerful. Chu Mu and the other 6 shensis also leaped down. Chu Mu's 2 swords danced, and a silver-white sword light cut through the sky, leaving behind fine streaks. Wherever the silver-white sword light landed, the low-level Nirvana beasts would be severed. With Chu Mu's powerful attack power, low-level Nirvana beasts would not be able to withstand a single sword strike. Even mid-level Nirvana beasts would not be able to withstand a single sword strike. Only high-level Nirvana beasts would be able to fight against him. Kill, kill, kill. With 2 swords in his hands, Chu Mu was like a meat grinder. Wherever he passed, the frenzied Nirvana beasts would die one after another. Once the Nirvana beasts died, they would quickly disappear, leaving behind a streak of Nirvana Chi. With a thought, Chu Mu's spiritual thought power quickly kept the streak of Nirvana Chi into his space ring, killing and keeping. These 2 actions seemed to be completed at the same time. The other 5 shensis were also very powerful. Killing these low-level Nirvana beasts was like chopping vegetables for them. In the inner part of Nirvana City, a dark golden sky steel had appeared out of nowhere. The sky steel was majestic and ancient, but it also had a feeling of Nirvana rebirth. On this dark golden sky steel, which seemed to have existed since ancient times, names gradually appeared. It was as if an invisible carving knife was carving on the dark, golden, heavenly steel one by one. Every word was vivid and lifelike, carrying traces of vicissitudes and Nirvana Chi fluctuations, revealing their sharpness. Very quickly, 100 names appeared on the dark golden sky steel. The top 10 names were silver-white in color. The silver-white names were very eye-catching on the dark golden sky steel. The other 90 names below were black iron in color and were not as eye-catching as the top 10 names. The first name was Su Mingyu. Behind his name was the record of killing Nirvana beasts. Li Yu's name was in second place. If they saw this, they would be very surprised. Su Mingyu was not a shensi, but he could actually suppress a shensi, even if it was only temporary. The third name was Tsang Lei, the fourth name was Lin Yiming, the fifth name was Chu Mu, the sixth name was Lian Qingyu, and the seventh name was Feng Guohai. The number behind each name was constantly changing and increasing rapidly. Some increased by 1 point, some by 10 points, and some by 100 points. It could be seen that killing a low-level Nirvana beast was 1 point, a mid-level Nirvana beast was 10 points, and a high-level Nirvana beast was 100 points. As for a grand Nirvana beast, it had not appeared yet, but it was estimated to be 1,000 points. The number behind Chu Mu's name jumped rapidly from 1 point to 10 points. In a short span of 3 breaths, it had increased by over 100 points, indicating that he had killed quite a few low-level and mid-level Nirvana beasts. He did not count how many Nirvana beasts he had killed. Suddenly, his 2 swords seemed to strike the hardest thing in the world. He felt his hands tremble and the swords break. It turned out that these 2 high-grade saint swords had unknowingly experienced many battles. They had been infused with the divine wilderness sword essence and had been eroded by it. They had been destroyed. Compared to the mid-level saint swords, these 2 high-grade saint swords had indeed lasted much longer. With the swords broken, Chu Mu's strength dropped significantly. With a thought, 2 high-grade saint swords flew out from his interspatial ring. In the previous experiential training, he had killed some high-grade sword of Gojoseon. Other than obtaining their interspatial rings, he had also collected their high-grade saint swords. Therefore, Chu Mu had quite a number of high-grade saint swords in his interspatial ring, but most of them were more ordinary. Holding the 2 high-grade saint swords tightly, Huang Xiaolong once again executed his dual sword art. Sword light danced in the air as the high-grade high god realm imperishable sword intent, the corrosive divine wilderness sword essence, the high-grade high god realm space law force, and incomparably tyrannical peak 9-star physique were channeled into the swords, displaying the lesser 8 forms of the void shattering. Every sword strike was powerful to an unimaginable degree. The reason why Huang Xiaolong did not use his 3rd-grade sword force was because none of these low-level and mid-level Nirvana beasts could withstand a single sword strike from him. More often than not, they would be killed in 1 strike. In a frenzy, the Nirvana beasts were fearless, not fearing death as they continued to charge forward. Like tigers, leopards, lions, elephants, eagles, and cranes spreading their wings, if it weren't for the fact that most of these plant-type Nirvana beasts could only stay where they were. Unable to move, they would have joined the army. Even without using his 3rd-grade sword force, each of Chu Mu's sword strikes was powerful enough to cause others to tremble. The high-grade high god realm imperishable sword intent and high-grade high god realm space law force were enough to send chills down one's spine. Nirvana beasts died one after another, and the Nirvana beasts behind them charged forward, taking the place of the fallen. With a series of sword strikes, 2 high-grade saint swords were broken, crippled, and unusable. 2 new high-grade saint swords appeared in Chu Mu's hands, and he continued to execute his dual sword art, continuing to fight and kill. As he continued to fight and kill, Chu Mu unknowingly seemed to have touched upon something. He only felt that there was a clear feeling as if the clouds had parted to reveal the moon. All of his previous efforts, all of his comprehension, and all of his accumulations seemed to have gathered and exploded at this moment. The dual sword art was divided into minor completion Desheng and perfection. Chu Mu had been stuck at Desheng's level for a long time. Back when he was still on the ancient sword continent, he had already reached Desheng's level. The Desheng dual sword art could increase his battle prowess by 50%, and Chu Mu had always wanted to cultivate the dual sword art to perfection. However, there was no path to follow for the dual sword art after Desheng. He could only rely on his own accumulation and comprehension to deepen his understanding of the dual sword art, hoping to create the dual sword art after Desheng's level. After many years of hard work, Chu Mu's various accumulations finally converged at this moment, and the quantitative change began to lead to a qualitative change. In an instant, spiritual thoughts gushed out like a spring, whistling in his mind, rolling up thousands of waves. In his mind, there seemed to be figures holding 2 swords, constantly brandishing them. From the initial jerkiness, they became more and more skilled, proficient, and in control. The dual sword art at the entry level was jerky, while the minor completion level was proficient. Deshang's dual sword art was proficient, while perfection level was control. Perfection level of the dual sword art, control. Chu Mu's eyes were incomparably bright, and the 2 swords paused for a moment. The countless spiritual thoughts and figures in his mind instantly erupted, and a tyrannical aura surged from his body like a volcano erupting. The 2 swords moved again, and the trajectory of the swords was even more agile. Chapter 1190. Dual sword technique perfection allowed one to control the swords in their hands freely and without restraint. It was as if all restraints and shackles had broken through this world and entered a wider world. The 2 swords slashed out, their trajectories difficult to follow. They were more agile, more sharp, and more precise. Dual sword technique perfection could double one's battle prowess. Chu Mu was even stronger. Grasping the essence of the lesser 8 styles of shattering void was executed under the dual swords. Every strike was deadly, and the silvery white sword rays wreaked havoc in the void. Everywhere they passed, the bodies of the Nirvana beasts would be sliced open, and the cuts were incomparably smooth. With the dual sword technique perfection, Chu Mu's efficiency in killing the Nirvana beasts suddenly increased. The number behind his name on the Nirvana sky, steel, jumped rapidly. Following that, his name flashed and shot up from the 5th place to the 4th place, pushing the original 4th place down. The 1st place was still Su Mingyu. However, the battle points that Li Yu obtained from killing the Nirvana beasts were gradually approaching Su Mingyu. A godson was a godson after all. He had tyrannical strength and foundation. Even if he was at a disadvantage, he could still turn the tables. The frenzied Nirvana beasts were even stronger. Although these sort of Gojosian were tyrannical, there were still some who died under the frenzied attacks of the Nirvana beasts. After killing for an unknown period of time, Chu Mu's name jumped again and rushed to the 3rd place, pushing the original 3rd place down. The higher one's ranking on the Nirvana sky steel, the more rewards one would receive after the Nirvana tide ended. Even if one couldn't get into the top 10 of the Nirvana sky steel, killing Nirvana beasts would also give one Nirvana chi. With so many Nirvana beasts appearing continuously, there was no need for him to search for them. He just needed to unleash his strength and kill them. Chu Mu changed to a high-grade Saint Sword again. He had no choice. The corrosive power of the divine, desolate sword essence was too strong. Fortunately, he had dozens of high-grade Saint Swords in his collection. Otherwise, he would fall into an awkward situation where he had no weapon to use. High-grade Nirvana beasts appeared. Under the Nirvana tide, the strength of a high-level Nirvana beast would increase by 50%, making it even more powerful. Even with Chu Mu's current strength, he would not be able to kill a high-level Nirvana beast with a single strike. Within the silver-white sword light, there was an additional trace of pale silver. It was not the ethereal kind of silver-white sword light, but an endless sharpness. Sword Force. Level 3 Sword Force. Level 1 Sword Force could double the power of the sword art, Level 2 Sword Force could triple the power of the sword art, and Level 3 Sword Force could quadruple the power of the sword art. After comprehending the essence of the lesser void shattering 8 forms, under the amplification of his 3rd grade Sword Force, its power had increased by 4 times. It was no longer inferior to other types of low-grade heaven-rank sword arts. In fact, due to Chu Mu's high-grade High God Realm imperishable sword intent and high-grade High God Realm space law force, its power was comparable to a mid-grade heaven-rank sword art. A mid-grade heaven-rank sword art's power was extremely terrifying. One strike could kill a crazed high-level Nirvana beast and harvest its high-grade Nirvana chi. Killing a high-level Nirvana beast would give Huang Xiaolong 100 battle points. However, using level 3 sword force consumed a lot of stamina. Even with Chu Mu's peak 9-star physique refining attainments, he could not maintain this level 3 sword force for a long time. He could only release level 3 sword force right before the sword light was about to hit the high-level Nirvana beast, killing it in one strike. A high-level Nirvana beast's strength was strong, and after going berserk, its power had increased significantly. After Chu Mu killed a high-level Nirvana beast with a single strike, the other sword of Gojosian noticed this. Each of them was astounded by Chu Mu's attack power, killing a crazed high-level Nirvana beast in one strike. What kind of concept was that? This guy is really a monster. The other god's children also noticed the situation. Seeing Chu Mu easily killing a crazed high-level Nirvana beast in one strike, they were shocked beyond words. Either this guy was hiding his strength before, or he has improved again, Lian Qingyu and Feng Guohai thought to themselves, but they were not jealous at all. Currently, there were only 10 gods' children in the human race, and they had high hopes for them. Not only were they talented and had great potential, but they were also intelligent. They knew very well that if they worked together, they would be strong, and if they separated, they would be weak. If they fought among themselves, it would cause chaos in the Heavenly Sword Hall. Therefore, unity was very important. Among the crowd, a peak 9-star sword of Gojosian also saw Chu Mu kill a high-level Nirvana beast in one strike. He was shocked and worried that he would be overtaken. Suddenly, his body shook, and a vigorous aura erupted from his body. Immediately, a layer of dark, cold luster spread rapidly on his body. In a breath's time, a full set of armor appeared on Su Mingyu's body. Head armor, body armor, arm armor, and leg armor. Dark iron-grade divine equipment. There were several types of divine equipment. Different divine equipment had slight differences in appearance. With the balanced divine equipment as the standard, the arm armor and leg armor of the strength-based divine equipment would be relatively heavier, but it would not affect the aesthetics. On the other hand, the speed-based divine equipment would be smoother. The divine equipment on Su Mingyu was clearly a speed-based divine equipment. After putting on the divine equipment, Su Mingyu's speed increased tenfold. When he struck, the sword was so fast that it could not be seen with the naked eye. Even the power of divine sense could barely follow it. In just a moment, he struck several times consecutively. The power of each strike was shocking, and he killed a crazed high-level Nirvana beast. In just a breath's time, Su Mingyu had killed a crazy high-level Nirvana beast. It seemed like she had only used one sword, but in reality, it was because she had activated her speed-type divine armor, which increased her speed by 10 times. Once Su Mingyu activated the divine equipment, his strength increased tremendously, and he became even more powerful. The efficiency of killing Nirvana beasts increased several times. On the Nirvana Divine Monument, the battle score behind his name increased rapidly. He once again pulled away from Liu, who was about to catch up. With the first person to activate the divine equipment, the other sword of Gojosian, who had divine equipment, also activated their divine equipment, activated it and put it on. The strength-based divine equipment, speed-based divine equipment, balanced divine equipment, defensive divine equipment, and various other types of divine equipment appeared one after another. Liu and the rest also put on their divine equipment. Under the divine equipment, their auras became even more intense, and their strength increased exponentially. Looks like I have to use the divine equipment too, Chu Mu thought to himself. The difference in strength between using and not using the divine equipment was obvious. As the two swords danced, a silver-white sword light circled around. Level 3 sword energy was injected into it, and it was incomparably sharp. Everywhere it passed, Nirvana beasts died, instantly clearing a circle. At the same time, he quickly retreated to avoid being surrounded by the crazed Nirvana beasts. With a thought, he activated the 4 parts of the divine equipment in his body. Currently, Chu Mu was only at the initial level of refinement. Although he had removed the divine equipment many times to increase his proficiency, he still needed 8 breaths of time to be able to successfully put it on. During the process of putting it on, it was best not to be disturbed by external forces. Otherwise, it would be delayed, and in serious cases, it might even lead to undesirable consequences. 8 breaths of time was enough for experts, especially in such a great battle. Many unforeseen events could happen. Therefore, Chu Mu retreated to avoid being surrounded by the crazed Nirvana beasts. Using his footwork, he retreated like a snake, avoiding the encirclement of the Nirvana beasts. The divine equipment gradually appeared. The jet-black divine equipment covered the surface, and his strength, speed, sword energy, and so on began to increase. Chu Mu could also clearly feel that the protective sword aura that he released outside had been integrated with a powerful force and had been strengthened several times. The protective sword aura that was 10 times stronger could already play a very good protective role. It would not be that easy to break through it. Even if it was an attack from a deity, it would weaken it by a few %. If it was a defensive black iron divine equipment that increased the protective sword aura by 100 times, even a deity's attack would not be that easy to break through. In 8 breaths of time, Chu Mu successfully put on the divine equipment. His body was covered in a layer of jet black. Unfortunately, Chu Mu was only at the initial level of refinement, so he could only use half of the divine equipment's power. His strength, speed, and basically all other aspects had been doubled. As for the protective sword aura, it had been increased by 5 times. Chu Mu's physique had reached the peak of 9 stars, so the doubling of strength was very obvious. Moreover, he was a sword master, a type of cultivator who did not have a powerful physique, sword energy, or even sword chi. The reason why they had extraordinary strength was all because of their sword techniques. Sword techniques were a kind of fighting skill, a skill to use the sword, and also a skill to train one's physique. It was a skill to use strength and speed to a high degree. The strength and speed of a sword master might not be much stronger than that of an ordinary person, but in terms of the use of strength and speed, they were much stronger than ordinary people. For an ordinary person, they might only be able to use 30% of their strength. But for a sword master, not only could they use 100% of their strength, they could even reach 120%, 150%, or even 20%, or even higher. Chu Mu was a sword master, and a sword master who had reached the level of a great grandmaster. In terms of the use of his strength, almost no one could compare. The doubling of strength and speed for Chu Mu meant that his strength had increased by several times. It was not inferior to the other black iron divine equipment. Deshang's strength increased after refining the sword of Gojoseon. Chu Mu stopped retreating and instantly shot forward. With the use of strength, Chu Mu's speed increased by at least 3 times. In an instant, the sword light flashed past. A few crazy Nirvana beasts were slashed by the sharp and fine sword light and died. Several streams of Nirvana chi also flew towards Chu Mu and entered his space ring. Originally, Chu Mu needed to use level 3 sword force to be able to kill the crazy high-level Nirvana beasts in a second. However, after activating the divine equipment, his strength increased by several times. He did not need to use level 3 sword force to easily kill the crazy high-level Nirvana beasts in a second. A protective sword aura that was 5 times stronger was enough to withstand the attack of any low-level Nirvana beasts. It could even withstand the attack of a mid-level Nirvana beast for a moment, which was enough time for Chu Mu to react. Moreover, the protective sword aura that was enhanced by the divine equipment also had the ability to recover rapidly. After it was shattered, it could reform in a short period of time and form an effective defense. In an instant, Chu Mu was like a ferocious tiger charging into a flock of sheep. With both swords in his hands, he started to slaughter the Nirvana beasts. Chapter 1191. Divine equipment could also be considered a trump card a trump card. One would not use it easily because it would exhaust one's energy. The power of the body, the power of the sword, and the power of the senses of the soul would be constantly depleted. As a result, even if regular sword kings obtained a god artifact, they would have to consider carefully before using it. Otherwise, if they did not control it properly, it would not be of any use and would instead drain all their power. Hence, divine equipment was not something an ordinary sword of Gojosian could use. The genius-level sword of Gojosian had accumulated a lot of energy to support the consumption of divine equipment. It was as if they had entered an unstoppable state, killing crazily like a steamroller. When the sword of Gojosian used divine equipment, their strength increased far more than when the Nirvana beasts went berserk. It was unknown how long the Nirvana tide had started, but Chumu had already replaced his 8th pair of high-grade holy swords. The previous 7 pairs, a total of 14 swords, were all broken. There was no rest in a high-intensity battle. When one's energy was exhausted to a certain extent, one could only use medicinal pills to recover. Chumu's physique was strong, and his endurance was shocking. His self-recovery speed was unbelievably fast. Until now, he had not used any medicinal pills. When Nirvana beasts were killed, they would dissipate. Otherwise, the ground would be covered with corpses. Although there were no Nirvana beasts' corpses, there were some sort of Gojosian corpses. They were all shattered. Chumu's 2 swords killed 2 high-grade Nirvana beasts. On the Nirvana Sky Steel, his name jumped up to 2nd place. The original 2nd place belonged to Su Mingyu. Li Yu had already replaced him. Now, Chumu's name jumped up to 2nd place, pushing Su Mingyu down. If Su Mingyu knew, what would happen? It was also because they did not know that the sword of Gojosian hunted Nirvana beasts crazily. They worked hard to obtain battle results and raise their rankings as much as possible. The unknown was the greatest fear and also the greatest motivation. It was enough to drive people crazy. Suddenly, a cold silver light flickered in front of his eyes, like a shooting star cutting through the dark sky. A strong sense of crisis made Chumu's eyebrows jump. The speed of the silver light was indescribable. It was as if it had surpassed the speed of thought and was close at hand. He didn't have time to think. Relying on his instincts that had been honed from countless life and death experiences, he used the inch step and teleported to the side. He missed by a hair's breadth, and the cold silver light flew past his neck. Immediately after, the protective sword aura, which was strengthened by 5 times, was torn apart by the cold silver light as if it was thin paper. An ear-piercing sound was even transmitted into Chumu's ears. Chumu's pair of swords turned into 2 silver-white sword light, forming a cross and striking forward. The sword aura missed, and with his high concentration, he vaguely caught a glimpse of a silver-gray figure flashing before his eyes. Using inch steps continuously, he didn't need to think at all. He just relied on his instincts to dodge and counterattack. It was a strange battle. Chumu dodged the silver lights, attacks time and time again, and the attacks of his 2 swords missed time and time again. In that instant, Chumu seeing and listening to swords and touching swords, raising his 6 senses to the limit. Everything around him became extremely clear. The figure that attacked him also appeared clearly in Chumu's senses. One was a werewolf. The other was about 2 meters tall, and its body was incomparably robust. Its entire body was covered in silver-gray fur that flickered with a metallic luster. This silver-gray werewolf's body was extremely perfect. Every bulging muscle contained terrifying, explosive power. Its claws were sharper than regular high-quality saint swords. They were comparable to the best high-quality saint swords. After infusing the werewolf's power into them, they became even more terrifying. They easily tore through the protective sword aura that was strengthened by 5 times. Chumu estimated that even the protective sword aura that was strengthened by 10 times would not be able to block it. A grand Nirvana beast. Chumu's pupils shrank slightly. After killing for so long, a grand nirvana beast had finally appeared. Furthermore, the sense of danger that this grand nirvana beast gave Chu-Mu was several times stronger than the grand nirvana beast that they had encountered on the way to Nirvana City. Apart from the nirvana tide's amplification, the strength of this silver-gray werewolf's grand nirvana beast was also extraordinary. It was very likely that it was one of the top grand nirvana beasts. For example, there were also differences between godsons. Some geniuses that weren't godsons could also be monstrous geniuses that could rival or even surpass ordinary godsons. Nothing was absolute. A top grand nirvana beast strength was comparable to those stronger godsons. This made Chu-Mu excited. His blood boiled and his battle intent surged. The undying sword soul in his spiritual world released terrifying undying sword intent with a clear hum. The silver-gray werewolf's speed was extremely fast. Its movement trajectory was difficult to discern. If it weren't for the simultaneous activation of seeing sword, listening sword, and touching sword, Chu-Mu wouldn't be able to capture its movement trajectory, let alone fight against it. The power of the dual sword technique at perfection was also released to its fullest. The trajectory of the dual swords became extremely agile and nimble. Every slash of the sword contained all kinds of power. The essence of the lesser 8 forms of shattering void was completely integrated into it. The power of every slash had reached its peak. When a sword technique was mastered, it would gradually not be restricted to the original sword moves. To practice a sword technique, one first had to learn the sword moves, then integrate the corresponding power. That was the form, and mastering the essence was the intent. After mastering the essence of a sword technique, the intent was more important than the form. With the intent, one would be able to unleash the power of the sword technique, surpassing the limits. This was also the main purpose of a swordsman's diligent practice of sword techniques in pursuit of the essence. The sword technique that Chu-Mu was using now was no longer restricted to the 8 moves of the lesser 8 forms of shattering void. Instead, he had mastered the essence and integrated the intent of the lesser 8 forms of shattering void into every slash. Every move and every slash was the lesser 8 forms of shattering void. The silver-gray werewolf surrounded Chu-Mu and launched attack after attack. Claw shadows filled the sky, densely packed and impenetrable. Meanwhile, Chu-Mu waved his dual swords, and streaks of silver-white sword light crisscrossed around his body, colliding with the silver werewolf's claw shadows time and time again, counterattacking. Chu-Mu was caught in a fierce battle with the great Nirvana beast. Some other powerful sword of Gojoseon were also targeted by the great Nirvana beast. For example, the other 5 gods' children, as well as Su Mingyu and the other sword of Gojoseon, who were ranked in the top 10 on the Nirvana Divine Monument. The great Nirvana beast's strength was originally powerful, and after being doubled by the Nirvana tide, it was even more astonishing. Wanting to kill them was not an easy task. In a battle between God's children, the surroundings were cleared. Not a single sword of Gojoseon or any Nirvana beast dared to approach. Even if they were in a frenzy, the Nirvana beasts could still feel the aura on the great Nirvana beast, an aura that made them fearful. Fierce battle. The earth cracked and shattered under the collision of the attacks from both sides, and dust flew everywhere. The 2 figures were almost in close combat. As they circled around, there was no sound, but it was frightening and inexplicable. Close combat was the battle style that Chu-Mu was most proficient in, and it was also the way that his strength could be unleashed to the maximum. The earthquake force was pushed to the limit. Not only could Huang Xiaolong's sturdy physique withstand it, but it also increased the frequency of the earthquake force, increasing its power. High-grade High God Realm Imperishable Sword Intent, High-grade High God Realm Space Law, Peak Ninth Heaven's Fortune God Desolate Divine Sword Essence, Peak Ninth Heaven's Fortune God Realm Physique, an earthquake force that was not inferior to a High God Realm Space Law. Huang Xiaolong channeled all his strength into his two swords, and each sword slashed through the air with the intent of the lesser 8 forms of void shattering. With a poochie sound, Chu Mu's protective sword chi was torn apart. At the same time, a silver-white sword light that was infused with a 3rd-grade sword force easily cut open the silver-gray werewolf's abdomen. Wisps of energy escaped from the wound. The Nirvana beast was not a true life form, but a kind of energy life form formed from the accumulation of Nirvana chi and heaven and earth's origin energy. Whether it was injured or dead, it would not shed any blood. However, when a Nirvana beast was injured, it would release a part of its energy. This energy was equivalent to energy, and the more it was injured, the more energy it would lose. The silver-gray werewolf's sharp claws scratched Chu Mu's black iron god armor, leaving a scratch on it. Just another half an inch, and it would have been able to tear apart the black iron god armor. The black iron god armor was a product of the heavenly sword hall, an inconceivable existence. The body's defensive power was astounding, and it was difficult to break it open. Yet this great Nirvana beast's claw almost broke through the black iron god armor. It was extremely terrifying. If the attack landed on his body, Chu Mu estimated that even with his strong physique, he wouldn't be able to withstand it unless he broke through to the Nirvana realm. The moment the divine armor was struck by the werewolf's claw, a silver-white cross-shaped sword light slashed on the werewolf's body, opening another cross-shaped wound. More energy escaped from the wound. With his sword broken, Chu Mu hurriedly moved back with the inch step, narrowly avoiding the great Nirvana beast's sharp claws. 2 new high-grade saint swords appeared in his hands. Once again, he channeled all his energy into the swords. The swords vibrated, emitting sword cries. Chu Mu was also helpless. If the swords didn't break, he would have had the chance to follow up with another strike, dealing even more damage to the great Nirvana beast. Helpless, the swords broke. He had to find a sword that could withstand the divine wilderness sword energy, and he had to raise the quality of the undying sword. Otherwise, in such a high-intensity battle, the problem of the sword might become his shortcoming. But that was a matter for later. The most important thing now was to kill this great Nirvana beast. The great Nirvana beast had limited intelligence and only had instincts. After an intense battle, Chu Mu gradually understood the great Nirvana beast's fighting style. All its reactions were clearly recorded by him. The more he fought, the easier it became because Chu Mu had gradually grasped the situation. This was his hidden ability. In battle, he collected and analyzed his opponent, perfecting himself. Suddenly, the 2 swords attacked from different angles. It was the fusion of the essence of the lesser 8 styles of Shattering Void, the 9th style. In the midst of the chi-chi sound, the 3rd-level sword energy was activated. It was extremely sharp, breaking through the air, leaving behind 2 straight cracks in the air. Within the silver color, there were traces of darkness. The 2 swords were indescribably resplendent, stunning the world. One sword pierced through the chest of the silver-gray werewolf, and the other sword slashed through the neck of the silver-gray werewolf. It was like a hot knife through butter, unstoppable and killed. The 9th style, similarly, was not limited to the moves. When the intent was reached, the sword would reach. Chapter 1192. The appearance of the Grand Nirvana Beast meant that the Nirvana tide had reached its end. The Nirvana chi of the Grand Nirvana Beast was like a small snake that wriggled in midair, as though it was about to break through the air. Chu Mu's spiritual sense moved and enveloped the Grand Nirvana chi, keeping it in his interspatial ring. Once the Grand Nirvana Beast died, the surrounding Nirvana beasts quickly surrounded them. Chu Mu began his massacre once again. The other Sword of Gojoseon were still fighting against the Grand Nirvana beasts. It was not that easy to kill them. Seeing that Chu Mu had killed the Grand Nirvana beast, they seemed to have been provoked and unleashed their killing moves, taking out their trump cards. The strength of the sword of Gojoseon increased tremendously after unleashing all their trump cards. After killing their respective grand Nirvana beasts, they attacked the other Nirvana beasts. The endless Nirvana tide in the sky gradually calmed down. Its color also started to fade as though it was about to pass. When they noticed this, the Sword Kings didn't hold back in the slightest. Besides some trump cards that they couldn't utilize, they'd completely brought out 100% of their strength as they strived to kill as many rebirth beasts as possible and obtain as many accomplishments as possible. The Nirvana tide became fainter and fainter, almost disappearing. The number of frenzied Nirvana beasts also decreased sharply after being killed. There were not many of them left. The sword of Gojoseon, whose eyes were red from killing, started to fight. They fought to kill the Nirvana beasts, fighting for the Nirvana Chi after killing the Nirvana beasts. Chu-Mu killed another grand Nirvana beast, which was slightly weaker than the previous one. After killing it, one of the sword of Gojoseon suddenly reached out to grab the Nirvana Chi. Scram! Chu-Mu raised his sword and slashed out. The sword light was like a tide, as formless waves crashed onto the other party's body, unable to be dodged. This slash was executed skillfully. Wave after wave of energy surged out continuously, directly sending that sword of Gojoseon flying. It was constantly pushed back in midair by the repeated impacts. With a sweep of his spiritual sense, he immediately kept the great Nirvana Chi into his interspatial ring. With another 2 sword strikes, Shao Qin killed a few more high-ranked Nirvana beasts. After obtaining high-ranked Nirvana Chi, the Nirvana tide came to a complete stop. The Berserk Nirvana Beast Army was completely wiped out, all of them vanishing. If it wasn't for the fact that the air was still filled with a large amount of sword chi fluctuations, no one would have imagined that a tragic and cruel battle had taken place here not long ago. In this battle, the number of crazy Nirvana beasts that died was innumerable, and the number of human sword of Gojoseon that died was no less than 100. It could be considered as a heavy loss. On the other hand, the surviving sword of Gojoseon had a great harvest. There were pros and cons. No one mourned for the dead sword of Gojoseon, except for his family and friends. Death was a common occurrence in the world of swordsmen. Every day, countless people were born or died in the 4 major star areas of the human clan. The surviving sword of Gojoseon all returned to Nirvana City and headed straight for the Nirvana Sky Steel. The ranking on the Nirvana Sky Steel was what they were most concerned about. The sword of Gojoseon, who felt that he could be ranked on the Nirvana Sky Steel, couldn't wait to find out his ranking, whether he had entered the top 10, and what his ranking was among the top 10. After all, it wasn't just an honor, it was also related to the rewards. The sword of Gojoseon, who felt that he had no chance of entering the top 10, also wanted to know if he had entered the top 100. Although he wouldn't be able to obtain any rewards if he didn't enter the top 10, it was also a form of recognition of his strength, a symbol of superiority. As for the sword of Gojoseon, who couldn't enter the top 100, he had the mentality of watching a show. Looking at other people's rankings was also a form of motivation for himself. Not long after, the sword of Gojoseon excitedly arrived at the Nirvana Sky Steel and looked up. The first 10 names flickered with silver light and were extremely dazzling. Moreover, the higher the name was, the more intense the silver light was. As for the names from the 11th to the 100th place, they were black iron and were relatively less eye-catching. However, in the eyes of the majority of the Sword Kings, they were extremely extraordinary. Who's in first place? Li Yu. Who's Li Yu? The first name on the Nirvana Sky Monument was Li Yu's name, and the numbers behind it were the battle points. Li Yu was at the top of the list. Fourth brother, congratulations. Chu-Mu, and the rest smiled. You're not bad yourself. You almost surpassed me. Li Yu smiled at Chu-Mu. Indeed, the second place was Chu-Mu. His battle points were only 3 points lower than Li Yu's. He only needed 1 mid-grade Nirvana beast to surpass him. Mu didn't have any regrets about not being in first place. The 3rd to 6th place were all Shensi's. The 7th place belonged to Su Mingyu. This made him very unhappy. Originally, he thought that even if he couldn't get first place, he could at least occupy a spot in the top 3. Although he was unhappy, it was a fact that he was in 7th place. Suddenly, a surge of nirvana chi surged from the void. As it surged, it enveloped the sky above Nirvana City. "The Nirvana tide is here again," someone exclaimed. They had just experienced a life and death battle which was incomparably intense. Their energy was greatly depleted and they were feeling exhausted. If another Nirvana tide came, they would suffer heavy casualties. "It's not the Nirvana tide," Lin Yiming said. The Nirvana chi above Nirvana City was different from the Nirvana tide. It was in the shape of a whirlpool, like a black hole. The incomparably huge Nirvana whirlpool seemed to want to swallow the entire Nirvana City. For no reason, it brought an irresistible pressure to the sword of Gojoseon below. It was so heavy that it almost caused them to collapse. Suddenly, rays of light shot out from the Nirvana whirlpool. The first ray shot towards Liu. The second ray shot towards Mu. There were a total of 10 rays, which shot towards the top 10 on the Nirvana sky steel. After 3 breaths, the rays of light disappeared. Mu felt that there was something in his spatial ring. It should be his reward. With the reward in hand, everyone left. The Nirvana sky steel also gradually disappeared. This is what a rich and pure Nirvana chi. Mu checked his reward. When he took it out from his spatial ring, he was stunned. After taking a closer look, he was overjoyed when he used his spiritual sense. It was a crystal. The entire body of the crystal was chaotic. Its aura was weak and almost restrained. It was a collection of Nirvana chi. It was the crystallization of Nirvana chi. Mu originally thought that the reward would be Nirvana chi. The great Nirvana chi was already good enough. He did not expect that it would be a Nirvana crystal, which was of a higher grade than the great Nirvana chi. Moreover, there was more than one Nirvana crystal. Mu took a closer look and realized that there were a total of 10 Nirvana crystals. 2 of them were different from the other 8. They were bigger and their color was purer. The great Nirvana chi contained within them was also stronger. The 8 Nirvana crystals contained 10 rays of great Nirvana chi. As for the other 2 Nirvana crystals, they contained 100 rays of Nirvana chi. 10 rays of Nirvana crystal was a low-grade Nirvana crystal. 100 rays of Nirvana crystal was a middle-grade Nirvana crystal. In this way, Mu had 2 middle-grade Nirvana crystals and 8 low-grade Nirvana crystals. The great Nirvana chi contained within them was a total of 280 rays. After checking his reward, Mu also counted the Nirvana chi that he possessed. Among them, there was a total of 1,300 rays of low-grade Nirvana chi. As for middle-grade Nirvana chi, there were 900 rays of great Nirvana chi. There were nearly 300 rays of great Nirvana chi and 3 rays of great Nirvana chi. This meant that under the Nirvana tide, the total number of Nirvana beasts that died under Mu's sword was more than 2,600. Moreover, every Nirvana beast was in a frenzy. Even the low-grade Nirvana beast was more powerful than an ordinary peak 9-star sort of Gojoseon. Among them, the great Nirvana beast possessed the strength of a god sun. If the reward for second place was like this, then the reward for first place would surely be better. My body refinement and chi refinement are synchronized. If I want to break through to the Nirvana stage, the amount of Nirvana chi that I need to consume is even more. At least, I need 10,000 rays of low-grade Nirvana chi. Mu muttered to himself, 10,000 rays of low-grade Nirvana chi is only the minimum. If I want to stabilize it, then 15,000 rays is a must. After conversion, Mu had a total of 1,300 strands of low-level Nirvana aura. 900 strands of middle-level nirvana aura converted to low-level nirvana aura was 9,000 strands. 300 strands of high-level nirvana aura converted to low-level nirvana aura was 30,000 strands. 3 strands of great nirvana aura converted to low-level nirvana aura was 3,000 strands of low-level nirvana aura. In this way, if the nirvana chi of 10 nirvana crystals were converted to low-grade nirvana chi, it would be 280,000 rays. In total, it was over 323,000 rays. Not only was it sufficient for Chu Mu to steadily enter the nirvana stage, it was also sufficient for him to break through to the second level of the nirvana stage. However, he wasn't sure if he wanted to break through to the third level of the nirvana stage because he was cultivating both body refinement and chi refinement. If he only cultivated chi refinement, then the 323,000 rays of low-grade nirvana chi would be sufficient to cultivate to the fourth level of the nirvana stage. After all, the higher one went in the nirvana stage, the more difficult it was to cultivate. It was even to the extent that just the nirvana chi was already insufficient to satisfy the needs of cultivation and breakthrough. But no matter what, the amount of nirvana chi that Chu Mu possessed now was rather large, and it was sufficient to make many sort of Gojosian envious and jealous. Chu Mu felt that it was time to end this time's hunt for nirvana beasts and harvest of nirvana chi in the nirvana secret realm. After all, the amount of nirvana chi he had obtained this time was rather large. Even if he were to hunt for nirvana beasts again after a few months, he would at most gain a few thousand or 10,000 rays. Moreover, under the last nirvana tide, the nirvana beast army gathered together and was completely annihilated. There were less than half of the nirvana beasts left in the entire nirvana secret realm. Moreover, they were scattered widely, and it wasn't easy to find them. After informing Li Yu and the others, everyone had the intention to leave. It could be said that they were lucky to encounter the nirvana tide, very lucky. If it wasn't for them, they didn't know how long it would take for them to obtain the nirvana chi in the nirvana secret realm. The 6 of them formed a group and left the nirvana secret realm. A portion of the sword of Gojosian also left the nirvana secret realm, while the other portion stayed behind. This was because the amount of nirvana chi they had obtained wasn't much, and they still needed to continue hunting. Otherwise, it would consume a lot of battle merits every time they entered. Chapter 1193. After leaving the nirvana secret realm, the 6 divine princes returned to the main hall of the Heavenly Sword Hall. I need to go back and consolidate my foundation before attempting the nirvana realm, Li Yu said, looking at everyone. Yes, I also need to consolidate my foundation before attempting the nirvana realm, Songlei said. We should all consolidate our foundation before attempting the nirvana realm. This time, let's meet after the nirvana realm, Lin Yiming said. See you after the nirvana realm. After saying that, they left and returned to their respective floating islands. After Chu Mu returned to Zhentian's floating island, he informed Jiang Tao and entered the cultivation room. After activating various seals, he turned the cultivation room into a secluded chamber and began to cultivate in seclusion. His chi cultivation had reached the peak of the 9th heaven of creation realm. His body cultivation had reached the peak of the 9-star realm. Both chi cultivation and body cultivation had reached the peak of the creation realm. This was the limit. No matter how much he cultivated, he could not improve. The purpose of Chu Mu's seclusion was not to improve his cultivation, but to consolidate his foundation. There were differences between the peak of the 9-star realm. The more solid one's foundation was, the more beneficial it would be for future cultivation. Similarly, the more solid one's foundation was, the more difficult it would be to break through. However, the benefits after breaking through would be greater. Of course, if one's foundation was not so solid and stable, the difficulty of breaking through would be lower in theory. However, whether one could break through was a big problem. In general, there were pros and cons. But for real geniuses, they wished that their foundation was more solid and stable. Even if the difficulty of breaking through was higher and the price to pay was higher, it was worth it. Because every time one broke through to a new realm, it was equivalent to standing on a new starting line. For real geniuses, the starting line was very important. First, they had to have an advantage. Otherwise, they would be overshadowed and crushed by other geniuses. Consolidation was very important. Originally, Chumu needed more time to consolidate his foundation. After experiencing the Nirvana tide in the Nirvana secret realm, he had fought many times, walked on the edge of life and death, and killed many Nirvana beasts. His cultivation had completely transformed into strength and reached the peak. What he needed to do now was to go into seclusion and meditate on everything in the past without being disturbed by the outside world. Every life and death battle would give Chumu some enlightenment, more or less, no matter how little. Chumu would not let go of the opportunity to gain enlightenment because he knew that many little drops made an ocean, and in the end, there would be a qualitative change. Nirvana was a form of rebirth. Nirvana was a true transformation from the inside to the outside, from the material to the spirit, and from the body to the soul. Nirvana was not something that could be achieved by simply absorbing Nirvana chi. One must have sufficient knowledge. Without knowledge, one would not be able to successfully achieve Nirvana. If one failed to achieve Nirvana, one would be injured and one's cultivation realm would drop. One must spend a period of time after recovering from his injuries to recover his cultivation realm and reconsolidate it before he could once again attack the Nirvana stage. If it was too severe, his body would be torn apart by the force, and even his soul would be destroyed. The preparation before Nirvana was very important. No one dared to be careless because they could not afford to be careless. Even Sword God had to do the same when he was breaking through to the Nirvana stage when he was young. Chumu was in seclusion. Time after time he meditated and sorted out his thoughts, allowing his spirit to sublimate gradually. The other shensis were also in seclusion, preparing to break through to the Nirvana stage. Other than Chumu and the other 6 shensis who had entered the Nirvana secret realm, other than the first shensi who had already broken through to the Nirvana stage, the others had all returned to their respective floating islands and went into seclusion to cultivate. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. Every shensi was in seclusion. I wonder who will achieve Nirvana first. In the main divine hall, the elders knew that the shensis were consolidating their cultivation and preparing for Nirvana. While they were cultivating, they began to discuss. Paying attention to the shensis was one of their daily pleasures and also a kind of anticipation. At this moment, there was a sudden fluctuation on the wind-riding floating island where the second god sun, Murong Chingfeng, was located. A strange fluctuation of aura shot up into the sky like a beam of light, visible to the naked eye. Immediately, the elders of the main divine hall were alarmed. One by one, they appeared above the main divine hall and looked at the wind-riding floating island. The chi of heaven and earth fluctuated, forming waves of white air currents that rushed towards the wind-riding floating island. They gathered above the island and formed a chi cloud. As the chi of heaven and earth continued to surge in from all directions and enter the chi cloud expanded little by little. In the blink of an eye, the chi cloud had expanded to a radius of 1 mile, and it was still expanding. With Shensi Qingfeng's talent and potential, the chi cloud can reach at least 7 miles, an elder said. During the process of breaking through to the Nirvana realm, a chi cloud would appear. The size of the chi cloud represented one's talent and potential. It was an indirect reflection. The chi cloud during a breakthrough to the Nirvana realm was known as 19. 19 meant that the base number would increase, and the limit would be 9 times. The shallowest potential would be 1, and the deepest potential would be 9. 1 to 9 were also known as the lower, middle, and upper stages. 1 to 3 were the lower stages, 4 to 6 were the middle stages, and 7 to 9 were the upper stages. Most sort of Gojosian would be at the lower stages when they broke through to the Nirvana realm, but true geniuses could reach the middle stages. The bigger the stage, the more talented they were. 5 miles was a super genius, 6 miles was a genius among geniuses, and the upper stages were super geniuses among super geniuses. There were very few super geniuses among super geniuses, and every one of them had the potential to become a shensi. The difference between 7 miles and 8 miles seemed to be only 1 mile, but it was actually a huge gap in potential and talent. As the chi flow gathered, the chi cloud continued to expand. Soon, it broke through 3 miles of the lower stages and reached 4 miles of the middle stages. Moreover, it was still expanding, getting bigger and bigger. With Murong Qingfeng's talent, he could definitely break through to the upper stages. The elders guessed that it could reach 7 miles. Although Murong Qingfeng's talent and potential were amazing, there was still a gap between him and the first shensi, Guanlin. When the first shensi Guanlin underwent nirvana, her chi cloud had reached 6 miles. It's not just shensi Chengfeng. I estimate that the other shensi's chi cloud have also reached 7 miles. Another elder said, other than Guanlin, the elders knew that the other shensi's talent and potential were not much different. You all have forgotten that there is still the 10th shensi. His talent and potential are not ordinary. I estimate that he is above shensi Guanlin. That's right. Shensi Chu Mu's sword intent and power of laws have reached the upper stages of the divine realm. In this aspect, he is better than shensi Guanlin. Therefore, his chi cloud should be able to reach 8 miles. While the elders were discussing, the chi cloud above the wind riding hall had also broken through to the upper stages, reaching 7 miles. The 7 miles did not stop. It continued to absorb the chi flow and was still expanding bit by bit. However, it was very slow. Time passed. Finally, the chi cloud stopped absorbing chi and stopped expanding. It was fixed at 7 miles. Whether it was 7 miles or 7 miles, as long as it had not reached 8 miles, it was considered 7 miles. This was because the difference between 7 miles and 8 miles was complete. Even if it was 7 miles and 9 miles, it was only a little bit different from 8 miles. It could not be compared to 8 miles. However, the size of the 7 miles range was also related to the individual's talent and potential. Just like the comparison between 7 miles and 7 miles, there was a difference in talent and potential. The chi cloud had stabilized, which meant that Murong Qingfeng's breakthrough had become a reality. Next, it was time to wait. At this moment in the wind riding hall, Murong Qingfeng's broken body had been wrapped up by the nirvana chi and the chi of heaven and earth, forming a cocoon. The cocoon was blood red and covered with veins. It was like a huge heart beating continuously. Every time it beat, there would be a sound like the beating of a drum. Within the blood-red cocoon, Murong Qingfeng's broken body was also beginning to reassemble. Nirvana, the nirvana of life, was the reassembly of the broken body. A new structure, a more reasonable and powerful structure, one that was more compatible with the structure of heaven and earth, would go further. At this moment, there was a whistling sound in the sky above the wild John Hall where the third god son, Tuobajan, was. It was like a call to assemble. The chi of heaven and earth in the surroundings gathered rapidly and began to condense, forming a chi cloud. Once the chi cloud appeared, it quickly reached 1 mile. The elders were not surprised. The potential of the godsons were about the same. In terms of cultivation level, they were about the same. If they were to break through, it would be the right time. 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, the chi cloud continued to expand, reaching 4 miles. It continued to expand. 5 miles, 6 miles, 7 miles. After 7 miles, it continued to expand, but the speed had slowed down a lot. 7 miles 1, 7 miles 2, 7 miles 3, 7 miles 4, 7 miles 5. When it reached 7 miles 9 with difficulty, it finally stopped expanding and finally stopped at 7 miles 9. Comparing 7 miles 9 and 7 miles 8, there was a little more. This meant that Tuobajan's talent and potential were a little better than Murong Qingfeng's. The chi cloud stabilized. Within the wild John Hall, Tuobajan's broken body was also wrapped up by the blood-red cocoon. As the blood-red cocoon beat, it began to reassemble. If one were to listen carefully, they would be able to feel that every beat of Tuoba Zhan's blood-red cocoon was louder than the beating of Murong Qingfeng's. The higher the talent and the deeper the potential, the stronger the momentum of nirvana. Sounds like the beating of a heart constantly came out from Murong Qingfeng's and Tuoba Zhan's blood-red cocoon. The sound waves spread out, and the sound waves spread further and further. Not long after, there were whistling sounds in the sky above the autumn wind hall where the seventh god sun, Luo Qiushan, was. A large amount of qi of heaven and earth began to gather from all directions. Chapter 1194. 10 divine princes, 10 floating islands, 10 divine prince halls. Now, 8 of the divine prince halls had a large yuan qi cloud gathering above them. Each cloud was more than 7 miles wide. The largest was 9 miles wide, and the smallest was 7 miles wide. This showed that the difference in talent and potential between the 8 divine princes wasn't very obvious. The elders of the sword god's main divine palace stood above the divine palace, watching and discussing. The first divine prince, Guanlin, had already succeeded in nirvana long ago, so she didn't enter the trial realm. The other divine princes had all received inheritances, and their strength had increased after the trip to the trial realm. After a period of seclusion, their foundations had become more stable. Now it was time for them to try for nirvana and break through to a new level. Inside the 8 divine prince halls, there were 8 blood-red cocoons. Each cocoon was covered with scarlet veins, like the blood vessels inside a heart. The cocoons were also beating like a heart, making thumping sounds. Inside the blood-red cocoons, the broken bodies of the divine princes were being reassembled and rebuilt. A heart was reconstructed, beating at the same frequency as the blood-red cocoons. As the heart appeared, the other parts were also gradually reconstructed according to the heart. In the seclusion room of the palace of Zhantian, Chu Mu, who was sitting cross-legged, didn't move at all, as if he had become a statue. Suddenly he opened his eyes. An extremely sharp light shot out from his eyes, like a divine sword piercing the sky, piercing through the darkness and the void. A thump, like a heavenly war drum, came from his heart. The sound waves spread out, hitting the walls of the seclusion room and dispersing. The accumulation and consolidation are enough. It's time for nirvana. Chu Mu murmured as he took out nirvana chi. Streaks of low-level nirvana chi appeared and scattered around. He cultivated both chi and body refinement, so it was more difficult for him to achieve nirvana than for the other sort of Gojosian. Moreover, he had the talent and potential of a divine prince, so it was much more difficult than ordinary divine princes. 10,000 strands of low-grade nirvana chi was Chu Mu's own guess, and it was also the minimum requirement for him to achieve nirvana. 10,000 strands of low-grade nirvana chi was a number that could either succeed or fail. Chu Mu possessed a reserve of 323,000 low-grade nirvana chi, and he wouldn't take unnecessary risks for the sake of saving some nirvana chi. If he succeeded, there wouldn't be any great benefits, and he would only save some nirvana chi. If he failed, then it would cause his body to be injured, and his cultivation would regress or even be more serious. With a swoosh, streams of nirvana chi appeared. There were more than 1,300 streams of low-grade nirvana chi, more than 900 streams of mid-grade nirvana chi, and more than 90 streams of high-grade nirvana chi. In total, there were 20,000 streams of low-grade nirvana chi, which was 10,000 more than the standard. Chu Mu's spiritual sense wrapped around all the nirvana chi that was floating in the surroundings. His mind was highly concentrated, and he controlled the streams of nirvana chi. In an instant, they rushed into his body from all directions, from every angle. Nirvana chi entering one's body wasn't something fun. In an instant, Chu Mu felt thousands of swords piercing through his body. Intense pain crazily swept through his entire body. The nirvana Qi entered his body and wreaked havoc. It was as if numerous divine swords were slashing at Chu Mu's tyrannical body. His tyrannical body that had reached the peak of the 9-star realm by cultivating the astral calamity body refining technique started to be destroyed from the inside out under the ravaging of the nirvana chi. In order to achieve nirvana, one must first destroy and then rebuild. The more thorough the destruction, the more thorough the nirvana. However, there was a drawback, and that was that one must grasp the degree of nirvana. Different sword of Gojosian had different degrees of nirvana. The so-called degree referred to a person's limit, and a person's limit could only be grasped by that person. Going into seclusion before nirvana was not only to further consolidate one's cultivation and strengthen one's foundation, but also to thoroughly understand where one's limit was. Only then would one be able to achieve a better nirvana. If one didn't know where their limit was, their body would be destroyed during nirvana, and they wouldn't be able to reach their limit. Naturally, after nirvana, they wouldn't be able to achieve perfection. If they weren't careful and couldn't control it, they wouldn't be able to withstand it. At that time, not only would the nirvana fail, but they would also be seriously injured or even die. The most tragic thing wasn't death, but being crippled. It was better to be dead than to be alive. Chu Mu already knew where his limit was, but he still needed to control it. He needed to control it precisely to reach the standard of the limit, and 20,000 streams of low-grade nirvana chi was the number that he estimated his limit to be. The more tyrannical a body was, the harder it was to achieve nirvana. This was because it was more difficult to break the body before nirvana. The more difficult it was, the more pain one would have to endure when it was broken. At this moment, the pain Chu Mu was enduring was enough to make most Sword of Gojosian faint, but he stubbornly endured it. This was because he couldn't faint. Once he fainted, he wouldn't be able to control his limit, and if he lost control, he would only fail. He had to endure it with all his might. This pain was 10 times, dozens of times more than when the other Sword of Gojosian underwent nirvana. Even with Chu Mu's incomparably tenacious will, he found it difficult to endure it. His consciousness was on the verge of fainting. He didn't dare to fall unconscious, so he forcefully endured it. He tried his best to stay awake and control the shattering of his body. He didn't want to exceed his limit. Each strand of nirvana chi was like a divine sword, destroying and slicing apart the body. Chu Mu's body was shattered into pieces of flesh and blood. Only his soul and dantian were intact, not damaged at all. After his body was shattered, the nirvana chi rushed out and mixed with the flesh and blood chi, forming a giant blood-red cocoon around him. Blood-red veins appeared, similar to the meridians of a human body. When the streams of nirvana chi shot into Chu Mu's body and began to destroy his tyrannical body, whistling sounds echoed in the air above the Zhentian Hall. Immediately, streams of origin energy gathered from all directions. The elders were all alarmed. God's son Chu Mu is also undergoing nirvana. I estimate that God's son Chu Mu's nirvana chi cloud can reach at least 8 li. It shouldn't be inferior to God's son Guanlin's. High-grade high God realm sword intent and high-grade high God realm law force. This kind of talent and potential was unparalleled, giving the elders a great deal of confidence. Say, do you think God's son Chu Mu's nirvana chi cloud can reach 9 li? Suddenly, an elder spoke out of the blue, startling the other elders. For a moment, they didn't know what to say because they hadn't reacted yet. 9 li, it was hard to imagine. There was only a difference of 1 mile between 8 miles and 9 miles, but the difference was like the difference between heaven and earth. At least in the current records, after the fall of the gods, there were very, very few people who could reach 9 miles in the nirvana stage of the creation realm. It would not exceed the number of fingers on one's hand. In the main shrine, there were various ceiling formations set up to maximize the absorption of nirvana chi. Otherwise, the amount of nirvana chi required for 9 consecutive nirvana chi wouldn't be enough. If it wasn't enough, the nirvana chi would fail. The nirvana chi cloud above the Zhen Tian Hall gathered and formed, reaching 1 li in the blink of an eye. Its speed was much faster than the other Nirvana Chi clouds. The Origin Chi cloud that was 1 mile away was constantly absorbing Origin Chi. Streams of Origin Chi flowed in from all directions like a gurgling stream. They flowed endlessly, like rivers flowing into the sea and converging together. The Nirvana Chi cloud continued to expand, reaching 2 li, then 3 li. Soon it reached 3 li and 9 li, breaking through to 4 li, such a fast speed. The elders exclaimed, "This speed is even faster than Godson Guanlin's Nirvana Chi. Could it be that Godson Chu Mu's Nirvana Chi cloud can really reach 9 li?" After making another guess, the elders were even more certain of their suspicions. A 9 li Nirvana Chi cloud could startle the surroundings. The 4 li Nirvana Chi cloud continued to expand, reaching 5 li. The speed of growth was still very obvious. The Nirvana Chi gathered, whistling like a surging tide, causing the sky to change color. The Nirvana Chi cloud above the Zhentian Hall had already grown to 7 li, and the speed of expansion showed no signs of slowing down. 8 li. The Nirvana Chi cloud had reached 8 li. The elders' faces were all smiling. There were not many geniuses who could reach 8 li, let alone 9 li. Other than the godsons, only the direct bloodline or personal disciples of the great emperors could reach that level. This was because the great emperors had surpassed the saint-level experts in terms of life, reaching a whole new level. Their direct bloodline had extraordinary talent, and those who could be accepted as personal disciples by the great emperors were also very talented. Coupled with the great emperor's nurturing, their talents were outstanding. 8 li was not the end, but the speed of expansion of the Nirvana Chi cloud had slowed down a little. Countless streams of white Nirvana Chi flowed and gathered, spreading in the void as if it had become a Nirvana Chi ocean. The Nirvana Chi cloud had expanded to 7 li and 8 li, surpassing the number 1 god Sun Guanlin. The elders were getting more and more excited. Their hearts were filled with nervousness and anticipation. They were looking forward to seeing the scene that they wanted to see. 9 li Nirvana Chi cloud. 9 li Nirvana Chi cloud. 9 li Nirvana Chi cloud. Everyone was praying in their hearts that Chu Mu's Nirvana Chi cloud could break through the limit of 8 li and reach 9 li, 8 li, and 9 li. It continued to expand. Finally, it reached 9 li. In an instant, all the elders cheered and quickly transmitted their voices to the Deputy Grand Hall Masters and Grand Hall Masters of the main Divine Hall. When the Deputy Grand Hall Masters and Grand Hall Masters received the news, they were alarmed. They came out of their seclusion and came to the sky above the main Divine Hall. They glanced at the Nirvana Chi cloud above Chu Mu's Jin Tian Hall. 9 li Nirvana Chi cloud, that's great, a Deputy Grand Hall Master said happily. It's not just 9 li, it's still expanding, another Deputy Grand Hall Master said. 9 li 1, 9 li 2, 9 li 3, when it reached 9 li 4, the speed of expansion of the Nirvana Chi cloud further decreased. It became slower and slower, and it became more and more difficult. The speed of expansion could only be noticed by careful observation. 9 li 5, 9 li 6. Chapter 1195. The floating islands that looked like a belt of stars surrounded the surroundings of Sword God Island. They were densely packed and formed layers of defense. Looking from afar, it could be seen that there were Origin Chi clouds above 8 of the floating islands that were not small. They emitted waves of strong Origin Chi waves like the tide. Every Origin Chi cloud was emitting light, as if they were luminous bodies. That was the light that appeared because of the high concentration of Origin Chi. Most of the Origin Chi clouds were about the same size. Only one of them was the largest. It was obviously better than the other Origin Chi clouds. The eyes of the Sword God Hall Master, the 2 Deputy Sword God Hall Masters, and the elders were all focused on the sky above Jin Tian Palace. They were attracted by the origin chi cloud. The origin chi cloud above Jintian Palace had already expanded to the size of 7 miles. 9 li 7. An elder stammered as if he was tongue-tied. The other elders widened their eyes in shock. Their eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. The Sword God Hall Master and the 2 deputy Sword God Hall Masters also looked shocked, but they were much better. 9 miles was also within the range of 9 miles. However, it was among the 9 miles and belonged to the higher end. Even if they were all 9 miles, there were still differences. The origin chi cloud that had reached the size of 7 miles seemed to be fixed. However, the white origin chi flow was still flowing from all directions. It was continuous and poured into the origin chi cloud. The origin chi cloud was still growing bit by bit. The speed was extremely slow. A quarter of an hour later, the 7 li origin energy cloud had expanded to 8 li, and the flow of origin energy was still continuing to converge. 9 miles. The elders almost bit their tongues. The Sword God Hall Master and the deputy Sword God Hall Masters were shocked again. Could it be? The Sword God Hall Master's eyes trembled. He had a guess that made him extremely shocked. Very quickly, another half an hour passed, and the 8 li origin chi cloud expanded once again, reaching 9 li behind the 9-mile 9 yuan energy cloud. The yuan energy flow in all directions gradually weakened, stopped, and disappeared. As for the 9-mile 9 yuan energy cloud that had solidified, it seemed to be stirred up by an invisible hand. It slowly rotated and its speed increased bit by bit, turning into a spinning yuan energy cloud that was like a huge millstone. With a radius of nearly 5,000 meters, it covered the sky above the Zhantian Palace, forming a huge shadow. Swordsman Zhan Tian, Jiang Tao, and the rest raised their heads to look at the huge energy cloud that was spinning like a millstone. Their faces changed drastically as they felt that the energy cloud was about to fall and crush them. The heavy pressure caused them to feel uncomfortable. After all, they were all rebirth realm swordsmen. Moreover, they hadn't just entered the rebirth realm, and all of them possessed formidable strength. So the legend is true. Jiang Tao muttered to himself. In the eyes of Jiang Tao and the others, a 9-mile yuan chi cloud was almost a legend. Back when they underwent nirvana, the yuan chi cloud was only 4 to 5 miles. 9 miles 9. Make them all stop thinking. Not only them, but the elders were all dumbfounded. They couldn't utter a word. The Grand Hall Master and the Deputy Grand Hall Master were also stunned. They felt as if their thoughts had frozen. A 9 miles 9-mile yuan chi cloud was extremely rare even during the Age of the Gods, the most prosperous era of the human race. Even during the Golden Era, when geniuses were the most abundant, such a golden era was also extremely rare. The Grand Hall Master and the Deputy Grand Hall Master suddenly felt as if they had discovered a peerless treasure. The 9 miles 9-mile yuan chi cloud was like a huge millstone that was spinning in the sky, while the other origin chi clouds were motionless. In the secret room where Zhantian Palace was in seclusion, the blood-red cocoon throbbed again and again, producing a loud sound like the beating of a drum. Every time it throbbed, visible sound waves would spread out layer by layer, as if the air had turned into water. With a thump, the hearts of the swordsman Zhantian Palace's swordsman guards outside Zhantian Palace suddenly throbbed. Their blood surged, and they felt as if they couldn't control themselves. They didn't dare to get too close. Otherwise, their heartbeats would be affected, and their blood would flow faster. They would feel an uncontrollable pressure, which was very uncomfortable. Inside the blood-red cocoon, Chu Mu's soul didn't scatter, and his dantian didn't break. His consciousness was clear, and he took the initiative to guide the broken body to reassemble it. The first thing to reassemble was the heart. The heart supplied blood to every part of the body. Every time the blood-red cocoon throbbed, the meridians would move and gather at a certain spot inside the cocoon. Under the guidance of Chu Mu's consciousness, traces of power, which was the power of Nirvana Chi, spread out and gathered the broken flesh. Under the Nirvana Chi, the broken flesh underwent some kind of change. When the heart was reassembled, the Yuan Qi cloud above Zhantian Palace, which was like a giant millstone, trembled. Suddenly, a white beam of light shot down. It was a beam of light that was produced when the Yuan Qi was condensed to the extreme. The beam of light ignored all obstacles and hit the blood-red cocoon. The blood-red cocoon trembled, and the white beam of light spread out on the surface of the blood-red cocoon. It was quickly absorbed and seeped into the interior of the cocoon. It followed the blood-red meridians and became nutrients. It was injected into the heart that was being reassembled and accelerated the formation of the heart. Not long after, the heart was reassembled. It beat at the same frequency as the blood-red cocoon. With the heart as the center, the meridians gradually formed. The heart beat, and the Yuan Qi constantly rushed into the heart. With the beating of the heart, the Yuan Qi spread out and passed through every meridian. The same scene played out in the other 8 divine child palaces, but the progress was different. Among them, Murong Qingfeng was the fastest. His heart had already been reassembled, and his head had already reassembled. His neck had also reappeared, and his body was reassembled from top to bottom. The slowest was Chu Mu, who had just finished reassembling his heart. This was a crucial step that could not be interfered with. The sword guards of each divine son were scattered around the divine Sun Hall for protection. The Grand Hall Master, Deputy Grand Hall Masters, and elders of the General Divine Hall were still hovering above the General Divine Hall. However, the distance between the General Divine Hall and the Divine Sun Hall was nothing to them. They could arrive there in less than a breath. The sword guards were the first layer of protection, while the elders and the 2 Deputy Grand Palace Masters and Grand Palace Master were the second layer of protection. There was a third layer of protection in places that could not be seen. It was the previous generation of elders, the previous Deputy Grand Palace Master, and the previous Grand Palace Master. They all had a unified title, Supreme Elder. The Supreme Elders would not usually appear. They would only appear at the most critical moment. Originally, the Divine Child's Nirvana did not need to alarm the Supreme Elders. However, Chu Mu's Nirvana was too shocking. 9. The Supreme Elders were all extremely shocked. Their soul power spread across thousands of miles in the void, sweeping across everything. Nothing that could threaten them could get close. It could be said that because of Chu Mu, the Grand Palace had activated its highest defense. There were even waves of soul power that swept across Chu Mu's giant blood-red cocoon. Extreme Nirvana. This kid is extraordinary. This was the Supreme Elder's conversation. If this kid was born in the golden age of the gods, he would also be extraordinary. This evaluation was very, very high. Given the potential that Chu Mu had shown, he deserved this evaluation. His heart was completely reassembled, and so was his head. The head was the residence of the soul, so it was very important. A large amount of Yuan Qi and Nirvana Qi poured in, cleansing his flesh and rebuilding his head. A head that had undergone Nirvana, a head that had been reborn. As soon as his head was reconstructed, Chu Mu felt that his soul was no longer drifting. It was like a wanderer returning home, like a lost person who had found a place to stay, like a boat drifting in the dark sea that had found a harbor. As soon as his soul stabilized, his head was gradually completed, followed by his neck. If someone were to see this, they would definitely be horrified. It was the feeling of watching a body grow out of nothing. Each and every part of the body, each and every organ, was so clear that it was shocking to the eye. Nirvana required a long period of time to succeed, especially during the first Nirvana. Chu Mu had controlled his limits very well. There was no shortage or excess. Among the 9 divine children, he was the one who had undergone the most perfect Nirvana. The first perfect Nirvana also had an impact on the second Nirvana. If every nirvana was perfect, it would be easier to break through to the eternal realm because the foundation would be more solid. Chu Mu was not distracted. After his consciousness was reconstructed in his head, his soul was further strengthened. He wholeheartedly guided the reconstruction of the other parts of his body. Under his highly focused and conscious guidance, the neck was formed, and the other organs in his body were also formed one by one. At this time, the second divine child, Murong Qingfeng, was in the wind riding hall. 2/3 of his body had been reconstructed, but the skin had not yet appeared. The blood-red body looked very frightening. Everyone's consciousness was clear. They could clearly control and guide their bodies. They could clearly see their bodies being reassembled and reconstructed. This was a very strange experience. Basically, except for when they were reborn, and when they were reborn, they didn't have a clear consciousness and couldn't sense it. Only when they were reborn could they clearly feel and see it. It was a different experience, an unprecedented experience. It allowed the divine children to have a deeper understanding of their own bodies. They also had a clearer grasp of their own body structure. The human body itself contained endless mysteries. However, the mysteries of the human body were very profound and difficult to explore and master. The process of nirvana was a process of experiencing it personally. It was a process of mastering the mysteries of the human body. However, this mastery was not 100% complete, only a part of it. Chapter 1196. In the sky above the divine child palaces, the Yuan-Chi clouds turned into Yuan-Chi light beams and shot down, eventually disappearing. In the secret room of Palace Zhentian, there was a circle of white light flowing around the blood-red cocoon. That was the last of the Yuan-Chi light beams, which seeped into the blood-red cocoon. The blood-red cocoon also began to shrink, gradually shrinking. Eventually, it turned into a layer of skin, covering the body. The light beams shone brightly, as if the sun was shining. The light beams shot out like swords, filling the entire secret room. After a while, the light faded and a perfect body appeared. Every muscle in the body was superfluous, and every muscle was insufficient. The perfect ratio, perfect skin color, and perfect muscles were enough to make countless women scream. Thump, 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 thump after thump came from the chest. With the steady and powerful thump of the heart, waves of vitality emerged from the heart, along with the blood, and flowed to every part of the body, nourishing, and strengthening. The body seemed to have woken up from a deep sleep. The vitality gradually spread. The eyelids of the closed eyes trembled and slowly opened. At first, there was confusion about the outside world, as if he did not know what was going on. In an instant, the confusion in the eyes disappeared and was replaced by sobriety. A light called wisdom bloomed in the depths of the pupils, spreading and shooting out a bright light. His consciousness returned, and he took control of the body. With a slight movement, a silver-white robe appeared out of thin air and covered his perfect body. Chu Mu stood up and stood up. His 5 fingers clenched gently, and a strong and shocking explosion sound came from his palm. He did not use much strength, but it felt like he could even crush a mountain. Nirvana Realm. The body of a first sky of Nirvana Realm was so strong, shocking, and unparalleled. Perhaps it was not just a figment of his imagination that he could destroy a mountain with one punch. Because Chu Mu cultivated both chi and body, his Nirvana realm was 10 times harder than that of a swordsman who cultivated alone. The amount of Nirvana chi he needed to use was also 10 times more. The price was huge, but the reward was also huge. Now, with the strength of my body alone, I can contend against a first sky of Nirvana realm swordsman, Chu Mu said to himself. After Nirvana, his physique was more than 10 times stronger. The current him could easily kill the previous him. The divine wilderness sword essence had also undergone a qualitative change. It was purer and more powerful. The corrosive power within it was also more powerful. Chu Mu took a deep breath, and a whistling sound rang out. All the air in the cultivation room was sucked into Chu Mu's lungs, creating countless small cyclones that whistled. This was a phenomenon that could only be caused when one's attainments in body refinement reached a certain level. Legend had it that those experts with incomparably profound attainments in the Tao of body refinement could reverse rivers and replace the sun and moon with a single roar. After practicing a set of fist techniques, strength surged and transmitted within his muscles, gathering and erupting at his fist, causing the air within the training room to vibrate as if it was about to explode and shatter. Taking out a high-grade saint sword, he activated the divine wilderness sword essence and poured it into the sword. The sword trembled slightly, and Chu Mu carefully observed the changes in the sword. After nirvana, the divine wilderness sword essence's power was several times stronger than before nirvana. Naturally, its corrosive power would also increase. But as for the specifics, Chu Mu was still unclear, so he needed to conduct some experiments to understand. With the divine wilderness sword essence pouring in, the high-grade saint sword's body soon began to change. The change was not very clear, but Chu Mu could feel it. The originally blazing sword slowly dimmed. Gradually, mottled spots appeared on it as if it was rusted. Finally, it was so rusted that one could easily break it with a stretch of his hand. This had to do with Chu Mu's powerful physique and shocking strength. It was also because this high-quality sacred sword was crippled. A high-grade saint sword is no longer suitable for me. Chu Mu frowned. A high-grade saint sword was suitable for the high-grade sword of Gojoseon, and was also barely suitable for low-grade Nirvana realm swordsmen. The value of a top-grade saint sword far exceeded that of a high-grade saint sword. Most low-grade Nirvana realm swordsmen did not have a top-grade saint sword to use. The corrosive power of the divine wilderness sword essence had greatly increased, and a high-grade saint sword could not withstand it for a long time. Chu Mu had to find a top-grade saint sword. He had never used a top-grade saint sword before, so he did not know how much a top-grade saint sword could withstand the divine wilderness sword essence. There were two methods. One was to find a top-grade saint sword, and the other was to upgrade the undying sword. Both methods had to be carried out, because Chu Mu was proficient in dual swords, and a perfect dual sword technique would double his battle strength. The increase was very obvious, and the prerequisite to using dual sword technique was two swords. The body after nirvana was different from the body before nirvana. Chu Mu carefully sensed his body, from top to bottom, from outside to outside. He carefully sensed every inch of his body. The body after nirvana had been reborn. Every inch of his flesh and blood had been broken and reconstructed. It was a combination of flesh and blood that had been broken and reconstructed under the cleansing of nirvana chi and rich heaven earth yuan chi. Every inch of his flesh and blood faintly emitted a faint luster, containing astonishing power. Now, my cultivation has reached the first heavenly layer of nirvana. My body refinement attainments have also reached the first heavenly layer of nirvana. I can cultivate the second level of the astral calamity cultivation technique, but in other aspects I am still lacking compared to the veteran nirvana realm swordsman. Chu Mu thought to himself, the nirvana realm was the end of the creation realm, but it was also a new starting point. It was the starting line of competition for genius swordsmen. The nirvana realm was not only about one's body, but also one's spirit. Every swordsman who could advance to the nirvana realm was extraordinary. They had a deeper understanding of themselves, how to better unleash all of their strength, how to better gather all of their strength, and how to better combine all of their strength into one. In terms of the understanding of power, a nirvana realm swordsman had a deeper understanding of power than a swordsman below the nirvana realm. Moreover, with the passage of time, this understanding would continue to deepen and strengthen, becoming more and more powerful. The benefits of nirvana were not only a deeper understanding of one's own body and a deeper control of power, but also a clearer sense of the power of the heavens and earth. Even without concentrating, Chu-mu could clearly feel the fluctuations of power that filled the heavens and earth. In this case, it was not difficult to comprehend the power of the heavens and earth. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, ice, thunder, cloud, space. These 10 types of power of the heavens and earth were exceptionally clear. It was as if he could capture them with his mind. Among these 10 types of power of the heavens and earth, there were 2 types of power of the heavens and earth, which had not been successfully transformed into the power of rules. They were still at the level of ultimacy. Originally, it was very difficult to transform them into the power of rules. But now Chu-mu felt that, as long as he was willing, he could successfully transform these 2 types of power of ultimacy into the power of rules after a period of meditation. He could also clearly feel that there were other types of power of the heavens and earth that were different from these 10 types of power of the heavens and earth. Although they were not as clear as these 10 types of power of the heavens and earth, they were not vague either. Chu-mu felt that, as long as he was willing, he could also comprehend them in a short period of time. For example, the fluctuations of the power of the stars, the power of light, the power of darkness, and so on. The heavens and earth were filled with many types of power of the heavens and earth. Some were clear and some were vague, but Chu-mu could feel many types. However, he was not willing to comprehend them because the more power of the heavens and earth he comprehended, the more time it would take. The current 10 types of power of the heavens and earth were enough because Chu-mu had yet to fully tap into the potential of these 10 types of power of the heavens and earth. Mastering more power of the heavens and earth was called erudition. Working hard on one type of power of the heavens and earth to fully tap into its potential was called mastery. Erudition and mastery were 2 different directions. They could not be synchronized. Pursuing erudition meant grasping more, but mastery was more difficult. Pursuing mastery meant going deeper and deeper, unable to grasp more because time was limited. The comprehension of the power of the heavens and earth was not everything for a swordsman. The cultivation of a swordsman included sword origin, sword arts, power of the heavens and earth, sword intent, and so on. They all had to be involved in all aspects. Furthermore, some swordsmen would cultivate other types of power, such as body refinement. Every swordsman's time was basically fixed. Similarly, there were 24 hours in a day. There were 360 days in a year. During this time, they had to be spread out and used to cultivate several aspects. They could not miss a single one. If one focused on a single aspect, they were destined to not be able to go far. This was because the height of the barrel was different. The amount of water that could be stored was always limited. The lowest edge was the standard, not the highest. The reason why Chu-mu was able to sense the power of the heavens and earth so clearly was due to his extraordinary 6th sense. Other Nirvana realm swordsmen might not be able to sense as clearly as him. However, no matter what was said, no Nirvana realm swordsman would recklessly comprehend the power of the heavens and earth, unless they were stupid. Otherwise, the more they comprehended, the more time they would have to invest. They would become more and more scattered, resulting in nothing on the path of cultivation. Chu-mu thought for a moment. He felt that if he wanted to comprehend the power of the heavens and earth, his first choice would be the power of the stars. This was because his body refinement cultivation technique, astral calamity, absorbed the power of the stars. Perhaps comprehending the power of the stars and astral calamity body refinement cultivation technique could complement each other. However, that was a matter for the future. Right now, the most important thing was to transform the profound of ice and the profound of cloud into the power of law. He sat down cross-legged and focused his consciousness. He removed all distracting thoughts and focused on the profound of ice. The other power of the heavens and earth seemed to retreat. Chu-mu's surroundings were filled with intense power of the heavens and earth. The power of the heavens and earth revolved around Chu-mu, sparkling and translucent. The power of the heavens and earth was constantly being absorbed by Chu-mu. It entered his spiritual world and tempered the profound of ice, causing the profound of ice to transform. After reaching the Nirvana realm, Chu Mu's spiritual strength had become even stronger. His perception and control of the power of the heavens and earth had also increased by several times. The profound of ice was constantly being tempered by the power of the heavens and earth that was pouring into his spiritual world, transforming bit by bit. Chapter 1197. Inside the heaven-shaking hall's secluded secret room, the temperature of the air was very, very low. On the ground and walls, there were countless white frost marks that were sparkling and translucent. Layer after layer, it was as if it was a world of ice and snow, emitting a biting cold air. A layer of frost also appeared on the surface of Chu Mu's body. His sideburns and the tips of his eyebrows were all covered in frost, like stars. Suddenly, Chu Mu opened his eyes. In an instant, there seemed to be an ice flower blooming in the depths of his pupils. In a breath, the frost on his body dissipated. Soon after, the frost on the floor and walls also melted, vanishing into thin air. In his spiritual world, the profound of ice had completely transformed into the law of ice. After succeeding, Chu Mu did not stop. In the secret chamber, wisps of cloud suddenly appeared out of thin air. They gradually became denser, forming a cloud-like mist. They filled the air like a sea. The profound of clouds, the power of clouds. After nirvana, there would be a period of time to consolidate before coming out of seclusion. When the 8 shensis all came out of seclusion, Chu Mu had not yet. This was because his profound of clouds was still in the process of transforming. The Grand Elders all knew that Chu Mu was still in seclusion and nothing unexpected had happened. Therefore, they all fell silent and relaxed. After coming out of seclusion, the 8 shensis all began to discuss. Different people had different feelings towards nirvana, so it was necessary to communicate with each other. 10th brother should have succeeded in nirvana by now. After the discussion, their topic shifted to Chu Mu. This was because they already knew that the situation during their nirvana could not be compared to Chu Mu's 9 miles 9 yuan chi cloud. Speaking of this, they were very surprised. A 9 miles 9 yuan chi cloud was an achievement that far surpassed the first shensi, Guanlin's. I think he should have comprehended something and is still in seclusion. After a period of time, Chu Mu's figure could not be seen in the secret chamber that was filled with clouds. Suddenly, the clouds seemed to be blown by a strong wind, boiling and gradually converging at a point until they disappeared, revealing Chu Mu's figure. The profound of clouds had successfully transformed into the law of clouds. At this point, the 10 types of forces of heaven and earth that Chu Mu had mastered had all transformed into the power of laws. Among them, the power of laws of metal, wood, fire, water, wind, lightning, and space had all reached the minute subtlety level. The 3 types of laws of frozen cloud and earth were still at the basic level. Since his cultivation had been consolidated and Bingyan's 2 profound meanings had successfully transformed into the power of laws, Chu Mu came out of seclusion. 10th brother, you finally come out of seclusion. Feng Guohai came to look for Chu Mu. After nirvana, everyone's aura underwent a subtle change. It was the same for Feng Guohai and Chu Mu. 9th brother, you must have gained a lot from your nirvana this time. Chu Mu said with a smile. Your harvest must be more than mine. Feng Guohai smiled and said, Come, let's go to the Plethora Treasure Palace to pick out some treasures. Pick treasures at the Plethora Treasure Palace? Chu Mu was stunned, confused. Now that we've broken through to the Nirvana realm, our old swords and weapons are no longer suitable for us. Therefore, we need new swords. Also, we need some treasures that are useful to us. Feng Guohai said, the other brothers have already picked the treasures that they're satisfied with. Only you and I are left. Chu Mu immediately understood that Feng Guohai's main reason for staying until now was to go with him, or rather, to bring him along so that he would not be in the dark. Then let's go, 9th brother. Chu Mu smiled, understanding what was going on. Chu Mu was grateful, but he was not a sentimental person, nor was he good at expressing his feelings. He could only remember them. The Plethora Treasure Palace was on Sword God's floating island, located in a corner of the main divine hall. It was where all sorts of treasures were stored in the main divine hall. It was covered with countless powerful seals and was guarded by experts. Even if a high-level sword saint wanted to force his way in, he would only end up dead. Ninth son of God, 10th son of God. There were 2 deacons guarding outside the Plethora Treasure Palace. Both of them possessed the strength of saint level, but they were saints who had reached the limit of their talent and had basically exhausted all their potential. It was almost impossible for them to advance further in their lifetime. Therefore, they would feel respect from the bottom of their hearts for the divine children who were extremely talented and had great potential, even though the current divine children were no different from ants in their eyes. Chu Mu and Feng Guohai bowed to the 2 deacons as well. Then, the 2 deacons opened the door of the Plethora Treasure Palace, allowing Chu Mu and Feng Guohai to enter. Once they entered the Plethora Treasure Palace, they could smell the scent of treasures as soon as they took a breath. The Plethora Treasure Palace was not called so for nothing. They felt lost. The Plethora Treasure Palace was like a small world of its own. It was like a vast galaxy with countless treasures floating within. 10th brother, I'm going to find a few suitable treasures and a suitable supreme grade saint sword. You go on your own, Feng Guohai said. All right, Chu Mu answered. The 2 of them separated. Chu Mu began his search as well. First, he needed to find a supreme grade saint sword. It would be best if it could withstand more divine wilderness sword energies. Then, he would look for other treasures that were useful to him. The Plethora Treasure Palace was completely open to the divine children. This was the privilege of the divine children. But as a divine child, they could not abuse their privilege and only take a portion of the treasures that were truly useful to them instead of taking everything they saw. That would cause unnecessary trouble for those who came in later. Feng Guohai knew how to act appropriately, and so did Chu Mu. There was a section for swords. The swords that could be collected by the main divine hall were all extraordinary in terms of their grade. They were all the best of their grade. Chu Mu's goal was the supreme grade saint sword. Soon, he came to the section where the swords were stored. Many swords floated in the air, emitting rays of sharp light. The sharp aura was like a sword, and the formless sword Qi spiraled in the air. The area within tens of thousands of meters seemed to have turned into a land of death. Chu Mu entered the area and felt a chill run down his spine as soon as he stepped into the section of swords. It felt like the sword Qi was about to touch him and cut his body. Fortunately, he was a Nirvana realm swordsman. Even though he was only in the early stage of the first Nirvana realm, he could withstand it. If it had been before, it would have been difficult. With a glance, Chu Mu's divine sense poured out. His divine sense after Nirvana had undergone some changes as well. It was even more powerful. In addition to Chu Mu's special nature, his first Nirvana realm divine sense was comparable to, or even slightly superior to, an ordinary third Nirvana realm swordsman. In the section of swords, the weakest were the saint swords. Low-grade saint swords, mid-grade saint swords, upper-grade saint swords. Chu Mu's divine sense swept across them. Sure enough, every saint sword had its own uniqueness. They were all the best among their peers. These must be the supreme grade saint swords. Chu Mu thought. These swords had surpassed upper-grade saint swords in terms of aura. However, Chu Mu felt that they hadn't surpassed upper-grade saint swords by too much. They should be supreme-grade saint swords. There were thousands of supreme-grade saint swords. It wasn't a lot. Chu Mu also discovered that there were other swords above supreme-grade saint swords. They were swords whose aura surpassed supreme-grade saint swords. Could that be the sky-piercing saint sword? A thought popped up in Chu Mu's mind. The sky-piercing saint sword had another name. It was a sword that surpassed supreme grade saint swords, but was inferior to spiritual swords. The swords above supreme grade saint swords were spiritual swords. Legend had it that swords had spirituality, which was why they were called spiritual swords. The difference between the sky-piercing saint sword and spiritual swords was only in terms of spirituality. There was no difference in terms of quality. Simply put, the sky-piercing saint sword was a spiritual sword without spirituality. Only saint-level experts could wield spiritual swords. Without saint-level strength, one couldn't refine spiritual swords and couldn't withstand the power of spiritual swords. The sky-piercing saint sword was even rarer than supreme-grade saint swords. There were only a few dozen of them, and each one was different. Further up was a sword that surpassed the sky-piercing saint sword. It had a trace of spirituality, as if it was alive. Chu Mu knew that it was a spiritual sword. Spiritual swords weren't something he could withstand. There was no need to look further. Chu Mu's original goal was supreme-grade saint swords. However, after seeing the sky-piercing saint sword, he was moved. In terms of quality and material, the sky-piercing saint sword was far superior to supreme-grade saint swords, and even superior-grade saint swords. Look, there were thousands of supreme-grade saint swords, and only a few dozen sky-piercing saint swords. The difference of 100 times meant that the value of the sky-piercing saint sword was at least 100 times that of a supreme-grade saint sword. It was extremely rare. Chu Mu's spiritual sense locked onto the dozens of sky-piercing saint swords. He carefully examined each and every one of them. Supreme-grade saint swords were suitable for Nirvana realm swordsmen. Low and middle-level Nirvana realm swordsmen could mainly use them. High-level Nirvana realm swordsmen could also use them. However, some high-level Nirvana realm swordsmen with background or fortuitous encounters would use the sky-piercing saint sword. Some sword saints would also use the sky-piercing saint sword as a weapon. After all, spiritual swords were very rare and precious. Not all sky-piercing saint swords were suitable for a swordsman. This was because the power of heaven and earth that every swordsman grasped, the sword arts that they cultivated, and other aspects were different. Chu Mu wanted to find a sky-piercing saint sword that could significantly increase his strength. There was a sky-piercing saint sword that contained pure gold energy. It was incomparably sharp and seemed to be able to cut through everything. There was a sky-piercing saint sword that seemed to be compressed by a volcano. Its scorching heat could burn the world. There was a sky-piercing saint sword that seemed to be refined by an iceberg. Its cold chi could freeze 3,000 miles. There was a sky-piercing saint sword that seemed to be formed by thousands of thunderbolts. Its sword could destroy the world. Chu Mu discovered that the sky-piercing saint sword was relatively pure. It wasn't like other saint swords that could increase 2, 3, or even 4 types of heaven and earth power. This might be because the forging of the sky-piercing saint sword was different from other saint swords. Chu Mu had never forged a saint sword before. Therefore, he didn't know anything about the forging of the sky-piercing saint sword. He could only guess.